Hey guys, tonight we are going to ease into a quiet corner of history, a place and time so seemingly unremarkable, you might just drift off thinking about, well, not much. Imagine a small village nestled somewhere in a valley you've never heard of, living a life so monotonous, their biggest excitement is probably deciding whether to plant turnips or cabbage next year. Tonight, we're visiting such a place where the rhythm of life was predictable, maybe even a little too predictable, until something profoundly strange broke the pattern. Something that led them down a path so peculiar, so utterly bonkers from our modern perspective, that honestly, you probably won't survive this story awake. The stakes are low, the pace is slow, and the history is, well, boring. It's the perfect recipe for sleep. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like sharing, drop your location and local time in the comments below. I love seeing how far these sleepy histories travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive in Oak Haven on a crisp morning, the kind where the air bites just a little, carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. The sun is just beginning to peek over the ridge, casting long, distorted shadows that stretched and writhed like sleepy giants across the dew-kissed fields. There's a stillness here, a deep, quiet hum that suggests generations of unchanging routine. You see the thatched roofs of cottages huddled together, looking less like individual homes and more like mushrooms that have sprouted in a damp cluster. Smoke curls lazily from chimneys, thin gray tendrils against a pale sky, promising the warmth of a small fire and maybe a bowl of something simple, like porridge or last night's stew reheated. Walking down the single winding lane that serves as the village's main street, if you can even call it that, your footsteps make soft scuffs in the packed dirt. There are no cobblestones here, no grand paving, just earth, worn smooth by countless feet, hooves, and the occasional cartwheel. The houses are small, humble, built of local stone or wattle and daub, with timber frames that look ancient and weary. Windows are small, often covered with oiled paper or linen rather than glass, letting in a diffuse, milky light that keeps the interiors dim and mysterious. You pass the blacksmith's forge, silent for now, but you can almost hear the echo of hammer on anvil from yesterday, the rhythmic clang that would have been a constant soundtrack to the villagers' lives. The smell of coal dust and hot metal lingers in the air. You see a few chickens scratching in the dirt outside a cottage door. Their soft clucking the loudest sound in the village right now, besides the distant bleating of sheep from the nearby hillside. Life here, you understand immediately, moves at a different pace. It's dictated by the sun's journey across the sky, by the changing seasons, by the demanding cycles of planting and harvest. Time isn't measured in minutes or hours on a clock. Clocks are a luxury, a curiosity from the bustling towns far away. Here, time is marked by the church bell, ringing for prayer or maybe just to signify midday, and by the growing light and fading light. You live by the sun, rise with it, work under it, and sleep when it sets. It's a simple, honest rhythm, but perhaps, for some, a touch monotonous. Imagine doing the same things, day in, day out, generation after generation. It makes you appreciate modern convenience, doesn't it? Like, imagine not being able to just order a pizza when you don't feel like cooking. Brutal. The people you encounter are few and far between in this early morning quiet. A woman emerges from a cottage carrying a wooden bucket towards the communal well, her face etched with the hard work of rural life. She gives you a wary, curious glance, unused to strangers, before returning to her task. You see a farmer heading towards the fields, a hoe slung over his shoulder, his gait slow and steady. Their clothes are plain, practical, made of wool or linen, dyed in muted earth tones. No fancy silks or bright colors here, just the durable fabrics needed to withstand the elements and the rigors of manual labor. This isn't a place that features in the grand histories of kings and queens, of battles and political intrigue. Oak Haven is the background noise, the quiet hum of everyday life that made the grand stories possible, but rarely got a mention itself. It's one of countless villages scattered across the landscape, focused inward on its own small world. Their concerns are local, the health of the crops, the milk yield from the cows, the success of the lambing season, whether the roof will hold through the next storm. Global events are distant rumors, distorted and often irrelevant to the pressing matters of their fields and hearths. You can almost feel the weight of tradition here, the way things have always been done. Methods of farming, building, even cooking are passed down from parent to child, refined slowly over centuries, if at all. Innovation is rare, often viewed with suspicion. Why change something that has worked well enough for generations? This ingrained conservatism, while providing stability, also makes the community resistant to new ideas, sometimes even to things that might seem obvious to us today, like maybe trying a different fertilizer. Nah, great-grandpa used sheep manure, so sheep manure it is. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Even if not broke just means barely works. There's a small, weathered church at the heart of the village, its stone walls seemingly growing out of the ground itself. Its presence is central to life here, both spiritually and socially. It's where the community gathers, where major life events like baptisms, weddings, and funerals take place. The local priest or vicar is often one of the most educated people in the village, though educated here might mean he can read Latin and interpret scripture, not necessarily that he knows much about, say, agricultural science or basic hygiene. The air in Oak Haven feels different from what you're used to. It's cleaner, yes, but it also carries a certain density, a sense of things unseen. This is a world where the line between the natural and the supernatural is blurred, almost non-existent. Folk beliefs are deeply intertwined with religious doctrine. A good harvest might be attributed to God's favor, but also to placating the local spirits or ensuring you didn't offend the fairies dwelling in the nearby woods. Bad luck could be a sign of divine displeasure, or it could be the result of a neighbor's ill will, or maybe even the mischievous actions of a sprite. This isn't just quaint folklore. For the people of Oak Haven, these forces are as real as the ground beneath their feet. Think about that for a moment. In our world, we have science. We have explanations for almost everything. A crop failure is poor soil, bad weather, or blight. A sudden illness is a virus or bacteria. But here, a blighted crop could be a curse. A sudden illness could be an evil eye. This isn't ignorance in the modern sense. It's a fundamentally different way of understanding the world, one rooted in animism, superstition, and a deep, abiding respect and fear for the unseen forces that they believe govern their lives. Historians still argue whether the widespread belief in witchcraft and curses in rural communities was primarily a form of social control, a way to explain the unexplainable, or a genuine reflection of people's lived spiritual experiences. Maybe it was a bit of everything. Hard to say when you don't have security camera footage, right? A little quirky tidbit for you: in some rural communities around this time, people believed that certain sounds, like the ringing of church bells or the striking of a blacksmith's anvil, could ward off evil spirits or even disperse storm clouds. So the clang you don't hear from the forge right now might feel like a quiet morning to you, but to a villager, it could feel just a little less safe, a little more open to possibilities. It adds a layer of subtle tension to the quiet. Imagine relying on a loud noise to stop a thunderstorm. Gives sound barrier a whole new meaning. The mainstream historical fact here, something universal to villages like Oak Haven across many regions and periods, is the absolute centrality of subsistence farming to daily life. Your world revolved entirely around the cycle of the harvest. Success meant survival, failure meant starvation, or at least hardship that's difficult for us to imagine today. There were no supermarkets, no global supply chains to bail you out. If your crops failed, your livestock died, or the weather turned against you for too long, your family went hungry. It was a precarious existence lived on the edge of survival, where a single bad season could be catastrophic. This constant vulnerability shaped their outlook, their cautious nature, and perhaps their willingness to believe in forces that could influence their fate beyond their own hard work. You work the land from sunup to sundown, hoping the rain comes, hoping the pests stay away, hoping nothing curses your field. It's a lot of hoping, isn't it? And when hope isn't enough, maybe you start looking for other explanations, other ways to influence the outcome. As the morning wears on in Oak Haven, more villagers emerge. You see them beginning their chores, collecting water, feeding livestock, preparing simple meals, starting the long trek to the fields. Children bundled against the chill play near cottage doors with simple wooden toys or help with small tasks. There's a sense of community, yes, born out of shared hardship and mutual reliance, but also a sense of isolation, isolated from the outside world, and sometimes perhaps isolated from each other by suspicion or the weight of unspoken troubles. This is Oakhaven, a quiet, unassuming dot on the historical map, steeped in tradition and vulnerable to the whims of nature and, as they believed, the unseen world. It's a place just living its life, unaware that its mundane existence is about to be disrupted by something profoundly strange, something that will test the limits of their understanding and push them to take an action that seems utterly unbelievable to us. For now, though, the sun is just climbing higher, the day is just beginning, and Oakhaven is simply Oakhaven. Just another Tuesday in a quiet valley. What could possibly go wrong? The quiet hum of Oakhaven, that predictable rhythm you noticed upon arrival, begins to falter. Slowly at first, almost imperceptibly, like a single wrong note in a familiar tune. The first signs are small, things you might dismiss individually as just bad luck. A patch of early seedlings, usually hardy, turns sickly and withers despite adequate rain. A cow, normally a reliable milker, suddenly goes dry, her eyes dull and her coat losing its luster. The spring rains are a little too heavy, or perhaps they don't come when they're most needed, disrupting the delicate balance of planting. These aren't catastrophic events on their own, but they create ripples of unease in a community living so close to the bone. Every seed counts, every drop of milk is precious. When the expected yield isn't there, it means tighter belts later. It means less food stored for the lean winter months. The initial reaction is worry, maybe a shrug and a sigh about the unpredictable nature of farming. Well, the ground was cold, or old Bess is just getting on a bit. You hear these muttered excuses, attempts to fit the anomaly back into the realm of the ordinary, the explainable. But then it continues, more seedlings fail. Another animal falls ill, then another. The hens, usually a dependable source of eggs, stop laying, or their eggs are unusually small or malformed. Accidents happen more frequently than seems right. A farmer twisting an ankle badly in a furrow, a child falling from a low wall and breaking an arm, a vital tool snapping unexpectedly when it's needed most. The small misfortunes begin to accumulate, stacking up like stones, building a wall of anxiety around the village. The conversations in the lane, usually filled with talk of weather or the simple gossip of a small community, start to shift. The casual exchanges become tinged with apprehension. People look at their fields, their livestock, their neighbors with a new kind of worry in their eyes. The easy camaraderie begins to fray, replaced by a subtle undercurrent of tension. When something bad happens, the first instinct is no longer just resignation to fate. It's a question. Why? The weather itself seems to turn capricious. A sudden hailstorm in late spring batters the fragile young crops. A late frost catches the blossoms on the fruit trees. A stretch of debilitating heat wilts the vegetables just as they're maturing. It's not just bad weather. It feels almost deliberately malicious. It attacks when the village is most vulnerable, undoing weeks or months of backbreaking labor in a matter of hours. You see the despair on the farmers' faces as they survey the damage, the ruined potential, the grim promise of hunger. This sustained period of bad luck, this deviation from the expected, manageable hardships of rural life, shakes the foundations of Oakhaven. Their world is supposed to have a natural order. Plant in spring, grow in summer, harvest in fall, endure in winter. Hard work is supposed to yield results, even if modest. But now hard work seems insufficient. Piety seems insufficient. They pray, they work, they follow the old ways, but the misfortunes continue unabated. It's like the rules of their universe have changed without warning. Imagine this happening to you. Everything you rely on starts to fail. Your job gets harder, less productive, and your income dwindles. Your car keeps breaking down, your appliances conk out, and every time you try to fix something, something else goes wrong. It wouldn't just be annoying, it would start to feel targeted, right? Like the universe has it in for you. Now strip away all modern scientific understanding and explanations and replace them with a worldview where invisible forces, both divine and malevolent, are actively involved in daily life. What conclusion would you draw? The priest tries to offer explanations within the framework they understand. He talks of sin in the community, of perhaps not being pious enough, of needing more prayer, more repentance. He organizes special services, asks for fasting, urges greater devotion. But while some cling to this explanation, others look for more immediate, more tangible causes, even if tangible in their world includes curses and ill wishes. If God's favor hasn't been withdrawn universally, perhaps someone among them is invoking darker forces, bringing ruin upon the whole village. Whispers begin to circulate. At first they are hesitant, spoken behind cupped hands near the well or in hushed tones by the church gate. Did you see how Mrs. Gable looked at Thomas after he refused to trade his best hen? Old Man Hemlock hasn't been to church in weeks, and his potatoes are the only ones doing well. The focus narrows. Who is different? Who has a history of being difficult or strange or perhaps was once wronged by the community? Who might hold a grudge deep enough to call down this kind of ruin? Suspicion is a corrosive acid in a small, interdependent community. It eats away at trust, at the bonds that hold people together. The wary glances you noticed before become more pointed, more accusing. Neighbors who have lived side by side for decades start to avoid each other. Doors are closed a little more quickly. Children are warned away from certain cottages. The fear isn't just of the misfortunes themselves. It's the fear of the unknown agent causing them, and the terrifying possibility that the agent is someone you know, someone you interact with every day. The misfortunes become evidence, interpreted through the lens of fear and suspicion. That withered patch of seedlings, clearly blasted by an evil eye. The sick cow, bewitched. The broken ankle, tripped by unseen hands, directed by a malevolent will. Nothing is random anymore. Everything is a sign, a symptom of a deeper, more sinister problem. The bad luck isn't just bad luck. It's a pattern, a deliberate attack. It's a curse. The word curse starts to be spoken more openly, albeit still with a shiver of dread. It's not just a curse, but the curse. A blight specifically aimed at Oak Haven, seeking to destroy its livelihood, its peace, its very existence. This mainstream historical fact is crucial here. Rural communities across history and geography were incredibly vulnerable to environmental shocks and disease, and lacked the scientific understanding we have today to explain them. When confronted with inexplicable, ongoing calamity, the leap to supernatural explanations like curses or divine punishment was not only common, but often the most rational conclusion based on their worldview. They didn't have germ theory or agricultural science. They had faith in folklore. Think about it this way. If you've tried everything you know, prayed, worked hard, followed tradition, and things still go wrong in a persistent, devastating way, what else is left? It's easy for us to say, oh, they were superstitious, but put yourself in their shoes. If unseen forces are a fundamental part of your reality, a curse becomes a perfectly logical explanation for a prolonged, inexplicable string of bad luck that threatens your very survival. A quirky or fringe tidbit related to this. In some folk beliefs of the time, it wasn't just people who could cast curses. Certain objects, or even places, could be ill-wished or possess innate bad luck. Sometimes the focus wasn't just on a suspected witch, but on finding a cursed object hidden somewhere in the village, or believing that the village itself was built on unlucky ground. Imagine trying to find a cursed object in your house. Is it that weird inherited doll? That chipped mug? Where do you even start? It adds another layer to the paranoia. The scholarly debate here often revolves around the triggers for communal panics, like witch hunts or curse fixations. Historians still argue whether such outbreaks were primarily driven by genuine belief in supernatural threats, or if they were more symptoms of underlying social tensions, economic hardship, or power struggles within the community? Was the belief in the curse the cause of the social breakdown? Or was it a result of existing stresses and divisions that were exacerbated by hardship? It's the classic chicken and egg problem, but with more pitchforks, potentially. As the situation in Oakhaven deteriorates, the talk of a curse becomes dominant. It consumes the villagers' thoughts, fuels their fear, and directs their actions. The initial vague fear coalesces into a specific target, the source of the curse. Who is responsible? The search for an answer becomes paramount, driven by desperation. They need someone or something to blame, something they can confront, something they can act against. In a world where the lines between the physical and the spiritual are blurred, the search for a culprit inevitably leads to the unsettling intersection of human agency and supernatural power. They are looking for a witch or someone who has dabbled in forbidden magic, someone whose shadow, metaphorically or literally, falls dark upon their village. The normal rhythms of life have stopped. The quiet hum is gone, replaced by a rising tide of fear, suspicion, and the terrifying certainty that Oakhaven is under attack by forces they don't understand, but desperately need to defeat. The mundane worries about crops and weather have been overshadowed by a fear far deeper and more existential. The unease you felt initially, a subtle chill under the surface of village life, has curdled into something sharper, more potent. It's the tang of fear, thick in the air like wood smoke before a storm. With the misfortunes mounting, the abstract idea of bad luck is no longer sufficient. The human mind, yours included, craves explanation, especially when faced with suffering. And in Oakhaven, the most readily available, most terrifying explanation is taking root. Someone among you is doing this. The whispers intensify. They aren't just questions about why anymore, but accusations about who. Eyes begin to slide sideways during prayer, darting towards individuals who have always stood slightly apart. Perhaps they live on the edge of the village, or they have no close family, or their behavior has always been considered a little odd, a little other. This is a pattern you recognize, sadly, from history. When fear takes hold, the vulnerable are often the first targets. Anyone who doesn't fit neatly into the community's fabric becomes a potential thread to be cut. You start to notice how conversations cease abruptly when certain people approach. The easy greetings offered to everyone else are withheld, replaced by strained silences or mumbled excuses to leave. Children are tugged closer to their parents' skirts when passing a particular cottage. The isolation isn't just social, it's a physical barrier being erected, a quarantine born of fear. Imagine being on the receiving end of that. Every averted gaze, every hurried step away feels like a judgment, a confirmation that you are seen not just as different, but as dangerous. The evidence is all around now, reinterpreted through the lens of a curse. That stillborn calf wasn't just tragedy. Its twisted form is now proof of unnatural interference. The blight on the wheat isn't poor soil or bad seed, it's the touch of a malevolent hand. Even the most mundane accidents become sinister signs. Remember that farmer who broke his ankle? People now whisper that he stumbled over an invisible snare laid by the witch. The fever that struck old Mrs. Gable? It wasn't illness, but a draining of her life force by dark magic. Everything connects. Everything points to a single terrifying conclusion. A witch is active in Oakhaven, and she, for it is almost always she in these stories, is systematically destroying the village. This collective certainty, this convergence on a singular enemy, brings a strange, dark energy to the village. The diffuse fear now has a focal point, and that focus is palpable. People cluster together, muttering darkly, sharing proof. I'm afraid of proof that confirms their suspicions. Didn't she have an argument with the miller before his wife fell ill? I saw her cat lurking near the barn the night the cows went dry. The smallest coincidences are magnified, twisted into damning evidence. The need for a culprit is so strong it warps reality itself. Think about how quickly online rumors can spiral out of control today, turning innocent actions into evidence of nefarious plots, all fueled by fear and a lack of verifiable information. Now strip away the internet, the police, the justice system, and imbue that same rumor mill with a belief in literal magic and divine judgment. That's the volatile atmosphere you're breathing in Oakhaven. It's terrifying precisely because the lines between fact and fearful interpretation have completely dissolved. The process of identifying the witch often isn't a sudden revelation, but a gradual accretion of suspicion, a snowball rolling downhill, gathering mud and stones. It might start with one person voicing a hesitant concern, which is then echoed and amplified by others. Shared anxieties find a common target, and the community, desperate for action, fastens onto the most plausible within their belief system candidate. Historically, those accused of witchcraft were often women who were already marginalized, perhaps unmarried, widowed, elderly, poor, or outspoken. They might have traditional knowledge of herbs and healing, easily reinterpreted as spells, or simply possess a difficult personality that made them unpopular. Sometimes it was simply bad luck, striking someone whose neighbor didn't like them very much. It's a grim game of social survival where appearing normal and well-connected suddenly becomes a matter of life and death. A mainstream historical fact here is that accusations of witchcraft surged during periods of societal stress, crop failures, plagues, religious upheaval, or economic downturns. The inability to explain widespread suffering through natural causes made supernatural explanations more appealing, and finding a human scapegoat provided a sense of control and a target for collective anger and fear. The witch trials that swept across parts of Europe and America weren't random acts of cruelty. They were often desperate, misguided attempts by communities to understand and combat perceived threats in a world they believed was influenced by both divine and demonic forces. A quirky or fringe tidbit. In some folk traditions, witches were believed to possess witch marks on their bodies, supposedly places where their familiar spirits, often animals like cats, dickens, or even insects, would feed. Searching for such marks was sometimes part of the process of identifying a witch, adding a layer of invasive, horrifying scrutiny to the accusation. Imagine being publicly stripped and examined for moles or birthmarks, which are then declared proof of a pact with the devil. It adds another layer of vulnerability and degradation to the accused. As the suspicion solidifies around one or more individuals, the village leadership, perhaps the elders, the priest, or the village headman, face a difficult choice. Do they try to quell the fears, risking the accusation of protecting evil? Or do they lean into the panic, risking terrible injustice but potentially uniting the community against a common enemy? Often, especially under immense pressure and genuine belief in the threat, the latter path is taken. The mechanisms of communal judgment begin to turn. Historians still argue whether the people who confessed to witchcraft during these periods were genuine believers in their own powers, victims of torture or coercion, or simply individuals who felt so alienated and targeted that they accepted the identity thrust upon them. Were some elderly women truly eccentric healers with a deep connection to the natural world, whose knowledge was twisted into something sinister? Or were they just unfortunate souls caught in a terrifying spiral of mass hysteria? The truth is likely a complex, heartbreaking mix of all these factors. The atmosphere in Oakhaven becomes thick with righteous anger and fear. The gentle melancholy of Section 2 is gone, replaced by a dangerous energy. The quiet hum is now a low growl. People aren't just worried about their crops. They're focused on rooting out the evil among them. The accused, whoever they are no longer neighbors. They are the enemy, the source of all misfortune, the living embodiment of the curse that is destroying their home. The search for the witch isn't just an investigation, it's a hunt. And in this hunt, logic and compassion are often the first casualties. The stage is being set for a confrontation, a desperate act aimed at severing the connection to the perceived source of the curse and lifting the dark shadow it has fallen over Oakhaven. The low growl you felt simmering in Section 3 has erupted into a roar. The hunt isn't abstract anymore. It has a face, a name, a terrified human being cowering under the collective glare of the village. The moment of accusation is a terrible thing to witness, even from within the fearful crowd. It feels less like a legal proceeding and more like an explosion of pent-up terror and anger. Imagine the scene. The main square, perhaps, or the space outside the church, the air thick with anticipation. People are packed together, their faces illuminated by the flickering torches or just the pale, unforgiving light of the moon. Every eye is fixed on one spot, and there stands the accused. Perhaps it's the quiet widow whose knowledge of herbs was once respected, now twisted into suspicion. Maybe it's the eccentric old man who talks to himself, his solitude now seen as sinister secrecy. Or perhaps, most tragically, it's just someone who was disliked, someone who had an argument with the wrong person, someone whose misfortune coincided with the village's. Whoever it is, they are no longer a member of the community. They are the witch. The formal accusation comes usually from a village elder or the priest, their voice trembling with a mixture of fear and righteous conviction. They list the perceived crimes, the blighted crops, the sick animals, the unexplained deaths, the general run of bad luck that has plagued Oakhaven. Each point is met with murmurs of agreement from the crowd, nods and whispers that reinforce the narrative being built. It's a terrifying feedback loop, where the fear of the crowd fuels the accuser, and the accuser's certainty validates the crowd's fear. Look at their face, the accused. It's a mask of disbelief. Then horror, then perhaps a flicker of defiant denial quickly crushed by the weight of so many accusing eyes. What can they say? How can you prove you didn't cause a storm, or wither a field, or whisper spells to make milk curdle? In this atmosphere, any attempt to defend oneself sounds like lies, further proof of their deceitful, evil nature. Their very fear is interpreted as guilt. Their composure, if they manage any, is seen as unnatural coldness. There is no winning this argument. The process that follows isn't what we'd recognize as a fair trial today. There are no lawyers, no unbiased judges, certainly no presumption of innocence. It's a communal judgment, driven by belief and desperation. The goal isn't to find out if the person might be innocent, but to confirm what everyone already knows, that this person is the source of the curse and must be stopped. The methods used to determine guilt were often arbitrary, cruel, and based on superstitions that seem utterly bizarre to us now. They might search for witch marks on the body, moles, birthmarks, scars, anything that could be interpreted as a spot where the witch's familiar, an animal helper, supposedly, fed. Imagine the humiliation and violation of such an examination, with people poring over your skin, pointing at perceived imperfections, and declaring them proof of your pact with dark forces. It's degrading, terrifying, and completely nonsensical. But in the heightened reality of Oakhaven, it's deadly serious. Sometimes spectral evidence was accepted. Testimony from people who claimed to have seen the witch's spirit tormenting them or appearing in animal form. Of course, you can't cross-examine a spirit, and the accused certainly can't control where their spectral double might appear. This kind of evidence was incredibly dangerous because it was impossible to refute. I saw you appear in my dream and pinch me. How do you argue against that? It puts the accused in an unwinnable situation, trapped by accusations based on visions and nightmares. A mainstream historical fact about witch trials is that confessions, even clearly coerced ones, were often considered the most damning and desirable form of evidence. Why? Because under the legal thinking of the time, influenced by theological beliefs, only someone truly guilty could confess to such a heinous crime, especially one involving a pact with the devil. A confession was seen as the gateway to repentance and potentially saving the accused's eternal soul, even if it meant their earthly punishment was sealed. This led to immense pressure, both physical and psychological, being applied to extract a confession. Think about that perverse logic for a moment. They needed you to confess to be saved eternally, but the confession meant you'd be condemned temporally to execution. It's a grim paradox, isn't it? And in the face of overwhelming pressure, isolation, and the crushing weight of the entire community's fear, many people did confess for a variety of complex and heartbreaking reasons. Some might have genuinely believed they were being tormented by the devil and were somehow responsible. Others may have confessed simply to stop the questioning, the examinations, or the mounting terror. Some might have been mentally ill or elderly and confused. A quirky or fringe tidbit often associated with historical witch trials is the use of ordeals or tests. One of the most infamous was the water test, or swimming a witch. The accused would be tied, usually with their right thumb bound to their left toe, and thrown into a body of water that had been consecrated, blessed, or cursed to reject evil. The logic was that pure water would reject someone who had made a pact with the devil. So if the accused floated, they were deemed guilty and in league with the devil. If they sank and drowned, they were considered innocent. Yes, the test for innocence was dying. It sounds utterly insane, and it was, but it reflects the desperate measures communities took when they felt truly under siege by perceived supernatural forces. Imagine the fear of facing that, a test where the only way to prove you're not a witch is to die. Historians still argue whether most confessions obtained during witch trials were the result of torture, psychological coercion, and manipulation, or if some individuals genuinely believed they were afflicted by or in league with the devil, perhaps suffering from mental illness or other conditions misinterpreted through the lens of the time. It's a chilling question. Were these confessions authentic, or were they the final desperate act of individuals broken by fear and pressure? The truth is likely a mix, varying from case to case, but the prevalence of confessions under duress is undeniable. Back in Oakhaven, the pressure on the accused is immense. The village leaders might use various methods: relentless questioning, isolation, perhaps even physical discomfort, though we'll keep the details vague and PG-13, focusing on the psychological terror. The goal is to break them, to force them to admit their crimes, to name accomplices, oh yes, which panics tended to spread, and to reveal how they enacted the curse. Every answer the accused gives is scrutinized, twisted, and used against them. Their pleas of innocence are dismissed as lies. Their tears are seen as crocodile tears. Their silence is interpreted as stubbornness or defiance. It's a trap with no exit. The community watches. Their face is a mixture of morbid fascination, fear, and grim determination. They need this person to be guilty. They need this to be the explanation for all their suffering. Because if it isn't, if this person is innocent, then the curse is still out there, unexplained, uncontrolled, and potentially targeting anyone. The need for a solution, for a target, overrides any potential doubts or pangs of conscience. The accused stands alone against the weight of the entire village's fear. The air crackles with tension. The fate of Oakhaven, they believe, rests on this moment, on this accusation, on this person admitting their guilt. The whispers from Section 3 are now shouts, demands for justice, demands for an end to the suffering. They want the witch to confess, to break the spell, to lift the curse. And whether through exhaustion, terror, coercion, or perhaps even a deluded belief in their own guilt, born of the intense gaslighting and pressure, the moment arrives, the confession. Or perhaps they don't confess, and the village decides guilt is proven by other means. The witch mark, the testimony, the failure of an ordeal. Either way, the verdict is reached. The accused is deemed guilty. The relief that washes through the crowd is palpable, a dark wave washing over the fear. They have found the source of the curse. They have identified the enemy. Now they can act. But the question remains, hanging heavy in the air. Is this person truly the source of Oakhaven's woes? Or are they just a scapegoat, an unfortunate soul sacrificed to the terrible, consuming need for an answer? The process is complete. The witch has been identified. The stage is set for the next step, the confrontation with the source of the perceived evil, the attempt to break the curse. The tension in the air hasn't dissipated with the verdict. It's just changed flavor. The acidic fear of the unknown has curdled into something thicker, more focused. The anticipation of a resolution. They found their target, their scapegoat, the relief you felt, that dark, selfish wave washing over the village, is now tinged with a new kind of anxiety. Will the accused confess? Will they explain how they brought this suffering down upon Oakhaven? Most importantly, will they lift the curse? The setting might shift slightly. Perhaps they move from the open square, too exposed to the elements and prying eyes, to a more enclosed space. Maybe the sturdy stone interior of the church, where the heavy air of sanctity clashes unnervingly with the raw fear and suspicion. Or maybe the village hall, its usual purpose of mundane meetings replaced by this grim, extraordinary interrogation. Wherever it is, the atmosphere is charged, every shadow seeming to hold a secret, every creak of the floorboards sounding like an accusation. You are still part of the crowd, pressed shoulder to shoulder with your neighbors. Their faces, illuminated now by the soft, perhaps slightly unnerving glow of oil lamps or the pale light filtering through high windows, are a study in mixed emotions. There's grim satisfaction in some, fear still etched deep around the eyes in others, and perhaps a flicker of doubt in a few, quickly suppressed. Nobody wants to be the one who questions the consensus. Not now. At the front, center stage in this terrible drama, is the accused. They might be bound, their hands perhaps tied, or simply guarded closely by stern-faced villagers chosen for their perceived reliability or lack of personal connection. Though in a small village, that's tricky. They look different now, stripped of their former identity. They are no longer Widow Alara or Old Man Silas. They are the witch. Their clothes might be rumpled, their hair disheveled, their face a complex canvas of exhaustion, fear, and maybe, just maybe, a spark of defiance that the crowd finds deeply unsettling. Facing them are the village leaders. Perhaps it's the priest, his voice usually resonating with scripture, now tight with fear and accusation. Maybe it's the village elder, their face lined with years, now set in a hard mask of resolution. Or a small committee, representing the collective will and terror of Oakhaven. They stand there, the weight of the village's suffering on their shoulders, looking at the person they believe holds the key to ending it all. The confrontation begins, not with polite questions, but with demands. Confess your pact with the devil. Tell us how you brought this plague upon us. Name your accomplices. And the most urgent, the most desperate plea, lift the curse. Imagine the scene. The leader speaking, their voice echoing slightly in the enclosed space. The silence from the crowd is absolute, punctuated only by nervous coughs or the shift of feet. All eyes are on the accused, willing them to speak, to break, to give them the answer they so desperately need. It's like a terrible, slow-motion train wreck you can't look away from, even though you know, deep down, that the outcome is likely going to be tragic. The demands are relentless. They circle back, repeating the same questions, trying different angles, looking for any sign of weakness, any inconsistency. They might present the evidence gathered, the testimony of those who saw their spectral form, the finding of a witch mark, perhaps even a neighbor's suspicion dating back years. Every piece is fitted into the narrative of guilt, reinforcing the predetermined conclusion. The psychological pressure is immense. You are isolated, accused by everyone you know, facing people who are utterly convinced of your evil. Your denials are dismissed as lies. Your attempts to explain are seen as trickery. Every word you utter or don't utter is interpreted through the lens of suspicion. It's a kind of psychological torture designed to wear you down, to break your will, to force a confession, any confession, that will validate their beliefs and give them a pathway forward. Think about it. If you were in that position, how long could you hold out? Against the weight of an entire community's fear, their righteous anger, their absolute certainty, it would be crushing. The accused in Oakhaven faces this impossible situation. They are trapped. If they confess, they are condemned to whatever fate awaits confessed witches, which historically speaking wasn't great. If they don't confess, they face continued interrogation, perhaps harsher methods, and still the strong likelihood of being condemned anyway based on the existing evidence. A mainstream historical fact about witch trials is that the questions asked during these interrogations often followed established patterns or even printed manuals developed by witch hunters. These manuals, like the infamous Malleus Maleficarum, Hammer of Witches, from the late 15th century, provided detailed instructions on how to identify, question, and prosecute witches. They outlined the types of questions to ask, how to interpret answers or lack thereof, and even suggested methods of coercion. These weren't spontaneous, organic conversations. They were structured interrogations aimed at confirming a specific narrative and extracting a confession that fit the prevailing theological and legal framework around witchcraft. So the leader in Oakhaven isn't just making things up. They might be following a grim script, perhaps not from a published manual, but from local tradition or general knowledge of how these terrible things were handled elsewhere. Did you make a pact? How did you sign it? With your own blood? Did the devil give you a familiar? What form did it take? A cat? A toad? Did you attend Sabbats? Who was there? The questions are specific, designed to trap the accused into admitting details that align with the popular understanding of witchcraft, even if those details were completely fabricated or imagined. A quirky or fringe tidbit, sometimes mentioned in historical accounts of witch trials, involves the use of specific physical actions or tests during interrogation beyond the full-blown ordeals. Sometimes they might bind the accused's thumbs and toes together for extended periods, or force them into uncomfortable positions, or deprive them of sleep. These methods weren't necessarily intended to cause lasting injury, though they often did, but to induce pain, exhaustion, and disorientation, making the accused more likely to confess or say what their interrogators wanted to hear. Imagine being forced to stand for hours on end, taped in a painful way under relentless questioning. Your mind would start to play with tricks, your resolve would crumble. It's a stark reminder that the line between interrogation and torture was incredibly blurry, if it existed at all in this context. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation of the interrogators in these trials was genuine religious conviction and a belief in the accused's guilt, or if it was more about maintaining social control, seizing property, or simply responding to mass hysteria and pressure from the community. Was the priest genuinely trying to save a soul from damnation? Or was he trying to appease a terrified congregation? Was the elder upholding justice or ensuring the village had someone to blame? It's a complex question with no single easy answer, varying undoubtedly from trial to trial. But it highlights the multifaceted pressures at play beyond just a simple search for truth. Back in Oakhaven, the demands continue. The accused might deny everything, their voice shaking, their eyes wide with terror or resignation. Or they might respond with desperate pleas, begging the villagers to believe them, reminding them of shared history, of kindnesses exchanged. But the collective fear is a powerful filter, twisting their words. A desperate plea becomes a cunning attempt to deceive. Tears are seen as feigned sorrow. Any sign of distress is proof of their inner turmoil and guilt. The village leaders keep returning to the core demand: lift the curse, undo what you have done. Yeah, they might even offer a perverse kind of mercy. Confess, cooperate, and perhaps the punishment will be less severe, a promise rarely kept, historically. They want to know the mechanism of the curse. How did the accused blight the crops? How did they sicken the animals? Did they use a spell, a potion, a hex? They need concrete details, something they can understand and perhaps counteract. The accused, however, might be genuinely bewildered. How do you explain something you didn't do? How do you describe a mechanism for a curse you didn't cast? Their inability to provide the specific details the interrogators want is seen not as proof of innocence, but as further proof of their cunning and their reluctance to break their pact with the devil. They are hiding the truth, someone might mutter from the crowd, and the murmur of agreement ripples through the assembled villagers. The crowd's impatience grows. They've identified the witch. Now they want results. They want the sickness to stop, the crops to recover, the fear to lift. Their whispers from Section 3, amplified into shouts in Section 4, are now becoming demands, an insistent chorus. Make them lift it. Force them. The pressure on the leaders intensifies, which in turn increases the pressure on the accused. The confrontation reaches a peak. The leader issues a final ultimatum-like demand. Tell us how to break the curse. Tell us now or face the consequences. The air is thick with unspoken threats, with the weight of the community's desperation. The accused looks from the stern faces of the leaders to the fearful, expectant faces of the crowd. There is no escape, no mercy. They have been cornered, trapped by fear, suspicion, and a terrible, unfounded accusation. Do they break? Do they invent a confession? Weave a fantastical tale to appease their tormentors? Do they maintain their innocence, knowing it might seal their fate? Or does something unexpected happen? The moment hangs in the balance, the fate of the accused, and indeed the perceived fate of Oakhaven, resting on this terrible, unequal confrontation. The village has demanded answers, demanded an end to their suffering, and they are waiting with bated breath for the accused to provide it. The air hangs heavy and still, the silence in the enclosed space broken only by the ragged breaths of the accused and the restless murmurs of the crowd. You watch, rooted to the spot, the tension unbearable. This is it, the moment everyone has been waiting for, dreading, and yet desperately hoping for. The confrontation has stretched for hours, or maybe it just feels that way. Time has lost its meaning, compressed into this single, agonizing point. The relentless questioning, the accusations, the weight of an entire village's suffering pressing down. It's too much for any single person to bear, let alone someone isolated and terrified. And then it happens. It might be a sudden collapse, knees buckling, the accused slumping to the floor in utter exhaustion. Or perhaps a slow, defeated raising of the head, eyes vacant, voice a mere whisper at first, then growing stronger, fueled by a desperate need to make it stop. Any way possible. The carefully constructed denials crumble. The pleas of innocence fade into the background noise of the last few days. They break, not necessarily because they are guilty, but because the pressure is absolute. In survival, or a swift end, becomes the only goal. They will give the village what it wants. A collective gasp ripples through the crowd. Relief, triumph, morbid curiosity, all of it probably. The leaders lean forward, their faces etched with a grim intensity. Speak, one commands, their voice hoarse. Confess, tell us what you did. And the accused speaks, but it's not a simple I did it. Oh no, that wouldn't fit. What fit the narrative, wouldn't explain the scope of the disaster, wouldn't provide the crucial next step. What emerges is a confession, yes, but twisted, distorted, born of fear and a desperate scramble for answers that aren't there. It's a story, woven on the spot, or perhaps drawing on fragmented fears, old folk tales, and the very accusations thrown at them. It has to be specific, bizarre enough to sound like dark magic, but just coherent enough for a terrified, non-logical mind to grasp onto. The voice of the accused is shaky, but gains a strange, almost manic energy as the confession pours out. They describe a pact not necessarily with the devil in the traditional sense, but with something malevolent, something that feeds on Oakhaven's prosperity, its light, its very substance. And that something, they explain, attached itself not just to them, but to the village itself. It burrowed into the very fabric of Oakhaven, manifesting as this oppressive shadow, this creeping blight that mirrored the physical ailments and agricultural failures. It's the town's own shadow, corrupted, extended, and turned against it. The details tumble out, a wild cascade of fabricated ritual and chilling imagery. They didn't cause the curse, they claim, not entirely. They were just the doorway, the crack through which this entity entered. And this entity, this parasitic shadow, is now inextricably linked to the town's collective being. It feeds on fear, on despair, on the very life force of the village. And it has a weakness, a vulnerability. To break the curse, they declare, you must sever the connection to this entity. You must destroy the physical manifestation of its hold. And that manifestation, they insist, is the town's shadow. Yes, the town's shadow. Not yours individually, not theirs, but the collective shadow cast by Oakhaven itself. Imagine the scene. The accused, perhaps still weak, but now speaking with a feverish intensity, outlining this utterly bonkers plan. You must burn it, they might gasp, eyes wide. You must gather the shadow of Oakhaven as it falls upon the square and set fire to it. There's a stunned silence. Burn. The town's shadow? What in the actual heck does that even mean? Is this person serious? Is this truly the key, or has the interrogation finally driven them completely mad? Or worse, Is this a final act of deception? A mad trick intended to lead Oakhaven down an even darker path? But remember, the village is desperate. They are beyond rational thought. They have been starving, sick, terrified. They have identified a witch, forced a confession, and now finally they have a plan. No matter how utterly bizarre and illogical it sounds to your modern ears, to them, in that moment of overwhelming need, it sounds like hope. It sounds like action. It sounds like a path to doing something about the suffering, rather than just enduring it. It's like when you're really sick and you'll try any ridiculous old home remedy someone suggests, gargling with salt water, drinking weird teas, wearing garlic socks, because doing something feels better than doing nothing. Except this is on a much, much bigger and much more terrifying scale. The leaders exchange glances. Doubt flickers, in some eyes, but it's quickly extinguished by the desperate hope reflected in others and the sheer pressure emanating from the expectant crowd. This confession, however outlandish, provides a narrative, a culprit, and a solution. It transforms the intangible dread into a concrete, well, as concrete as a shadow can be, enemy they can confront. A mainstream historical fact about witch trials and confessions under duress is that the confessions obtained were often highly fantastical and contained details that aligned with popular demonological beliefs of the time, rather than actual actions. Accused individuals, pressured by torture, sleep deprivation, and relentless questioning guided by specific manuals, would sometimes confess to attending sabbats, flying through the air, having sexual relations with the devil or their familiars, or transforming into animals. These were not necessarily admissions of things they had done, but rather accounts that fit the interrogator's expectations based on the prevailing understanding of witchcraft. The accused essentially learned the script and performed it to make the torment stop. So the Oakhaven witch's confession about burning the town's shadow, while specific to this story, mirrors the historical pattern of bizarre, ritualistic details emerging under extreme pressure, tailored to the perceived source of the problem. The accused might elaborate on the details, driven by the questions, the need to fill in the blanks. It must be at midnight, they might whisper, when the shadow is deepest and most vulnerable. Or, you must use fire drawn from a specific source, perhaps the hearth of the oldest house, or wood struck by lightning. They are improvising, pulling from the ether, giving form to the villagers' fears and their own terror. The shadow concept is brilliant, in a dark, twisted way. It's always there, a constant companion, but also intangible, elusive. It's the perfect symbol for the unseen force they believe is plaguing them. And the act of burning it, well, fire is seen as a purifying force, a destroyer of evil in many traditions. It makes a kind of warped symbolic sense in this context. The leaders begin to discuss it amongst themselves, their voices hushed at first, then growing in volume as the sheer audacity of the plan sinks in, along with the glimmer of possibility. The priest might weigh in, trying to reconcile this strange ritual with religious doctrine, which, let's be honest, is going to be a stretch. The village elder might ponder the logistics. Burning a shadow, Chabama. How exactly do you do that? Is it literal? Is it symbolic? The accused, perhaps, has already collapsed again, exhausted by the effort of inventing a whole supernatural narrative. The villagers, though, are seized by the idea. It's something they can do. A quirky or fringe tidbit from history sometimes involves sympathetic magic, the belief that you can influence something by performing actions on something that resembles it or is connected to it. For example, harming a doll representing an enemy to cause them pain, the origin of voodoo doll myths, or using a lock of hair or nail clippings in a spell. Burning a town's shadow could be seen as an extreme, literal-minded version of sympathetic magic. The shadow is connected to the town. It resembles its shape or presence. By destroying the shadow, you metaphorically and hopefully literally destroy the curse that is casting that shadow over the town. It's a chilling illustration of how logical leaps can become terrifying actions when fueled by panic and desperation. Historians still argue whether accused individuals who provided such elaborate, fantastical confessions truly believed what they were saying by the end of the process, having internalized the accusations and the pressure, or if they were simply saying anything to escape the torment, regardless of truth. Did the Oakhaven accused genuinely convince themselves of this bizarre, shadow-burning ritual in their desperation? Or were they cynically creating the most outlandish thing they could think of to buy time, or perhaps send the villagers on a fool's errand? It's impossible to know, lost to the silence of the past and the terrible circumstances. But the confession is made, and the village, for now, believes it. The murmurs in the crowd grow louder, transitioning from shock to tentative acceptance, then to a determined resolve. This is their chance. This is the answer they prayed for, however unconventional. Doubts are suppressed, logical questions are ignored. The accused has spoken, and the path forward, however strange, is now illuminated. The practicalities begin to be discussed. Where does the town's shadow fall at midnight? How large is it? How do you gather something intangible? The villagers will need to interpret the confession to make it actionable. They'll decide what constitutes the town's shadow. Maybe the shadow cast by the church, the town hall, or perhaps even a designated spot in the center of the square where the collective shadow is deemed to fall deepest. They'll need fuel, lots of it. They'll need fire, and they'll need the courage to go through with this utterly insane ritual. The focus has shifted completely from the accused to the confession itself and the bizarre task it demands. The person who delivered the confession is almost forgotten now. Their role fulfilled. They are no longer the terrifying witch who cursed them, but merely the vessel through which the solution was revealed. A grim kind of relief washes over the crowd. The responsibility, the terrifying burden of inaction has been lifted. They have a plan. They have a target. They have a ritual. And you stand there, part of the crowd, swept along by the collective surge of purpose. The sheer absurdity of burning a shadow should be screaming at you, highlighting the madness of it all. But the shared desperation, the pervasive fear, the desperate need to believe, it's intoxicating. It dulls the critical voice in your head. Plus, honestly, after everything that's happened, after seeing the crops wither and the people sicken, is burning a shadow really the weirdest thing you've encountered lately? Maybe not. Maybe, just maybe, it will work. The leader, perhaps the priest or elder, steps forward again. Their voice is solemn, resolute. The plan is set. The date is chosen. Tonight, at midnight. They will gather in the square. They will find the town's shadow, and they will burn it. The air is still thick with tension, but it's a different kind now. The tension of anticipation, of a community bracing itself for a final desperate act. You look at your neighbors' faces. Fear is still there, but mixed with a strange, almost feverish excitement. They are ready to fight back against the unseen enemy, even if the weapon is utterly nonsensical. Oakhaven is going to burn its own shadow, because the witch told them to. The air, thick with the residual tension of the confession, now vibrates with a new energy. Purpose. The words of the accused, however bizarre, have broken the stasis. They have offered a solution, a thing to do, and in a village suffocating under the weight of helplessness that is seized upon with a ferocious, desperate energy. Forget the logic. Forget the sheer, unadulterated weirdness of it. You have a plan, a batshit crazy plan, sure, but a plan nonetheless. The leaders, moments ago grim and uncertain, are now galvanized. Whispers ripple through the crowd, not of fear, but of action. The shadow, someone mutters. Where does it fall deepest? At midnight? Another questions. How do we burn it? The practicalities, nonsensical as they are, become the immediate focus. The abstract terror is being translated into concrete, or, less abstract tasks. Think of it like a really terrible group project where everyone is panicking the night before the deadline. The initial shock wears off, and suddenly it's all hands on deck, assigning tasks, figuring out logistics, even if the task itself makes zero sense. Except here, the stakes are slightly higher than a failing grade. Their life, death, in the continued existence of your village. So yeah, maybe slightly more pressure than writing a last-minute essay on the migratory habits of extinct dodos. The immediate task is preparation. The confession spoke of burning the town's shadow. Not just any shadow, not a personal one, but the collective darkness cast by Oakhaven itself. This requires fuel, lots of it. The villagers disperse, the collective inertia replaced by a sudden, urgent industry. You see them heading towards their homes, their sheds, gathering anything that will burn. Dry brush, fallen branches, old furniture, no one needs anymore. Or maybe even some they do need. But hey, curse-breaking priorities. Bundles of straw, discarded rags. Anything combustible is fair game. The air fills with the faint scent of dry wood and dust as piles begin to accumulate. The process of gathering materials takes on a ritualistic feel of its own. Every stick collected, every bundle of straw tied, feels like an act of defiance against the unseen enemy. Children are enlisted, carrying smaller loads, their faces alight with a mix of fear and excitement, like it's the most important scavenger hunt ever devised. Older folks, too frail to carry much, sit and supervise, their eyes sharp, offering advice on the driest wood or the best way to tie a bundle. It's a forced unity, born of shared terror, but unity nonetheless. As the afternoon wears on, the central square, which has been the stage for so much suffering and fear, begins to transform. Piles of wood and other tinder grow, forming a rough circle or mound where the burning is supposed to take place. It's a chaotic, organic accumulation at first, shaped by whoever arrives with their offerings. But soon the more practical-minded villagers take charge, organizing the fuel into a more efficient pyre. But the biggest and perhaps strangest logistical challenge is defining the location of the town's shadow. The accused was vague. Where it falls upon the square, they might have said, or perhaps where the town is darkest at midnight. This requires interpretation. A group of leaders, perhaps the priest, the elder, and a couple of prominent landowners or craftsmen, huddle together, arguing softly. The shadow of the church is strongest, the priest might insist, pointing towards the imposing stone structure. It represents the spiritual heart of Oakhaven. But the town hall casts a wider shadow, counters the elder. It represents the community, the people, and it's more central. What about the big oak tree? Someone else suggests. It's the oldest thing here. Maybe its shadow is the one. It's a debate based on symbolism, on desperate guesswork, on trying to project meaning onto an utterly abstract concept. There's no blueprint for burning a shadow, no ancient text detailing the correct procedure. Well, probably not, anyway. They're making this up as they go along, trying to reverse engineer the logic of a confession wrung from a terrified, potentially innocent person. Perhaps they try to literally measure the shadow as the sun sets, observing where it falls. At midnight, one might calculate, squinting at the lengthening shapes, the sun will be on the opposite side of the world, high above wherever that is. The moon, if it's out, will be low. The longest shadows will stretch this way. Another might shake their head. No, the moon is not the sun. Its light is different. We need the absence of light, the deepest dark. It's a ridiculous conversation, filled with amateur astronomy and superstitious speculation. But to them, it's deadly serious. They might even return to the accused cautiously to seek clarification. Imagine that scene, approaching the person they just condemned, who is probably now locked away or under guard, maybe half-conscious from exhaustion. Tell us again, they might plead, their voices strained. The shadow, where precisely? And the accused, perhaps coherent for a moment, perhaps still lost in fear or delirium, might offer another cryptic clue. Or maybe just stare blankly, unable to recall the fever dream they spun earlier. It's a chilling thought, relying on the words of someone broken by the very system seeking their help. Ultimately, a decision has to be made. It could be based on consensus, on the most convincing argument, or perhaps simply on the leader's decree. They might choose the very center of the town square, a neutral ground, a symbolic heart of Oakhaven, or perhaps a location tied to the origin of the affliction, like the edge of the blighted fields or the spot where the first person fell ill, though connecting those to a specific shadow location seems like next-level mental gymnastics. Let's say for the sake of narrative, they decide the central square is the place. It's where the suffering was most public, where the confession was made, where the community gathers. It feels right symbolically. So the piles of fuel are consolidated in the designated spot, forming a large, rough circle or pile, several feet high. It looks less like a ritual pyre and more like a hastily prepared bonfire, perhaps for a very depressing town festival. People carry water buckets, just in case, though the idea of water helping against the supernatural shadow curse seems as logical as the rest of the plan. You can smell the dry wood, the faint scent of desperation hanging in the air. A mainstream historical fact about the practicalities of large-scale public rituals or punishments during certain historical periods is the sheer logistical effort required, often involving the entire community. Public executions, burnings of books, effigies, or people, or major religious festivals weren't just spontaneous events. They required coordination, gathering materials, preparing the site, managing crowds, and ensuring order. Even something as horrific as a witch burning involved considerable organization, from building the pyre to arranging guards and ensuring the spectacle was visible and served its purpose, often as a deterrent. So while Oakhaven's task is bizarre, the process of mobilizing the community to gather resources and prepare a site for a significant public act aligns with historical patterns of collective effort for communal events, albeit twisted by superstition and fear. As evening descends, casting long, real shadows across the village, the atmosphere becomes heavy with anticipation. The initial flurry of activity slows. Families gather together for tense, quiet meals. Windows are shuttered. A nervous silence falls over Oakhaven, broken only by the occasional cough or the distant lowing of livestock. Everyone knows what is coming at midnight. You can feel the shift in the village's mood. The paralyzing despair of the past weeks has been replaced by a focused, if fearful, energy. It's the energy of people who have been told they have one chance, one desperate gambit, to reclaim their lives. It's a terrifying kind of hope built on sand, but a hope nonetheless. It reminds you of how people can latch onto anything when they're drowning, even a floating twig. The younger children are sent to bed early, though you suspect few will actually sleep. The older children and adults gather in the square, drawn by an irresistible pull. Torches are lit, casting flickering light and dancing shadows. Ironic, given the night's task. The pyre stands ready, a dark mound against the growing gloom. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the historical use of bonfires or large fires for communal purposes beyond warmth or cooking. In some cultures, bonfires were lit on specific dates like solstice or Beltane for purification rituals, driving away evil spirits or celebrating the sun's power. The act of a whole community gathering around a massive fire was deeply symbolic, representing unity, cleansing, and a shared transition. While Oakhaven's ritual is rooted in a specific, strange confession, the communal gathering around a large fire to combat a perceived threat taps into these older, perhaps subconscious, cultural echoes of fire as a protective or transformative force. They are, in a way, performing a dark, inverted version of an ancient purification rite. Historians still argue whether the emphasis on elaborate, specific rituals in witchcraft confessions was primarily driven by the interrogators, who imposed their own framework of what witchcraft should look like, or if the accused, desperate for release, actively drew upon folk beliefs and dark imaginings to create narratives they thought would satisfy their captors. In Oakhaven, was the idea of burning the shadow entirely invented by the accused in that moment of ultimate duress? Or was it a twisted interpretation of some pre-existing local superstition, a fear of the town's collective darkness given literal form? It's impossible to know the true genesis of this bizarre plan. As the hours tick slowly towards midnight, the atmosphere in the square grows thicker. The villagers stand around the pyre, their faces illuminated by torchlight, a mix of grim determination, abject fear, and a flicker of desperate faith. They speak in low tones, pointing towards the empty space where the town's shadow is supposed to fall at the appointed hour. The silence is punctuated by the crackling of the torches and the nervous shuffling of feet. You are there too, of course, part of the watchful, waiting crowd. Your modern mind is screaming at you, pointing out the sheer impossibility of what is about to happen. Burn a shadow? It's absurd. It's like trying to catch smoke in a net. Or scoop up moonlight with a sieve. It defies physics, logic, everything you know about the world. But then you look at the faces around you. You see the gauntness, the fear that has become a permanent resident in their eyes, the weary resignation born of weeks of suffering. You remember the withered crops, the empty fishing nets, the chilling silence that has fallen over the village. And the absurdity begins to fade, replaced by a creeping, unsettling possibility. What if in a world where unseen forces can blight the land and sicken the innocent, burning a shadow is the answer? What if their reality operates by different rules? The priest or elder moves towards the pyre, carrying a lit torch, ready to be the one to initiate the ritual. Others hold their own torches aloft, creating a circle of unsteady light against the encroaching darkness. The designated spot in the center of the square is empty, waiting for midnight, waiting for the town's shadow to fall, waiting for fire. The clock strikes the hour. 12 sonorous bongs echo through the silent village, each one a hammer blow against the tension. Midnight. The air feels colder, heavier. The torches cast their chaotic light, but in the chosen spot where the town's shadow is meant to gather, there is just the ground. Dark, yes, but not observably different from any other patch of ground under moonlight or torchlight. It's just dirt and maybe a few cobblestones. The leader raises their torch, their hand trembling slightly. Their face is etched with dood, with hope, with fear. They look at the assembled villagers, their silent, expectant faces. This is it, the moment of truth. Will a physical fire on physical ground somehow interact with an intangible cursed shadow? Will this bizarre act, born of confession and desperation, actually break the hold on Oakhaven? There's a collective breath held tight in 1,000 chests. The only sound is the faint whisper of the wind and the distant rustle of leaves. The leader dips the torch toward the waiting pyre. The first flicker of flame catches the dry straw. The flame catches. A small, tentative lick of orange against the darkness, instantly devouring the dry straw. It spreads with a speed that surprises you, a hungry crackling that cuts through the tense silence. The initial spark leaps to the kindling, then to the smaller branches. And within moments, the pyre is no longer just a pile of fuel, but a living, breathing thing of fire. Heat washes over you, pushing back the chill of the midnight air. It's a physical sensation, a stark contrast to the intangible terror that has gripped Oakhaven. The light of the torches dims in comparison to the growing inferno, casting wild, dancing shadows, ironically real shadows, that leap and twist across the faces of the onlookers and the buildings around the square. The scent changes too. The clean smell of dry wood gives way to the sharper, more acrid smell of burning, mixed with dust and perhaps the faint, unsettling odor of something less identifiable as the fire takes hold of whatever miscellaneous objects have been added to the pyre. The sound is immense, not just the crackling, but a roar, a hungry exhalation as the fire consumes air and wood. It sounds powerful, ancient, untamed. It's the sound of destruction, yes, but also of transformation, of energy being released. In the context of their hope, it's meant to be the sound of the curse being devoured. The villagers watch, rapt. Their faces, moments ago etched with fear and doubt, are now illuminated by the orange glow. Some shield their eyes from the intensity of the light and heat. Others lean forward, mesmerized, searching for some sign, some indication that this is working. There are whispers now, hushed and reverent. "Look how high it burns," someone mutters. "It's consuming the darkness," another replies, perhaps seeing what they desperately want to see. It's a strange scene, a whole community gathered in the dead of night around a massive bonfire performing a ritual that makes zero sense to your modern sensibilities. You feel the absurdity of it keenly. Here you are in the middle of what looks like a pagan rite crossed with a poorly planned barbecue, all based on a confession that was likely extracted under duress from someone potentially innocent or mentally unwell. It's like watching a group of highly intelligent people try to solve a complex mathematical equation using only interpretive dance. Utterly captivating, deeply symbolic, and almost certainly useless for the intended purpose. Yet, the sheer conviction in the faces around you is palpable. For them, this isn't absurd. This is the only hope they have left. This is tangible action against an intangible foe. They can feed the fire. They can feel its heat. They can see its light. It is real in a way the curse has not been. A creeping, invisible decay. The fire grows taller, a column of flame reaching towards the dark sky. Sparks fly upwards, disappearing into the inky blackness. Smoke billows, thick and dark, swirling around the square, stinging your eyes and making you cough. It blankets the area, adding another layer of obscurity, another kind of shadow. There's a group of people appointed to tend the fire, feeding it more fuel as needed, poking at it with long staves to ensure it burns evenly. They move with a sense of grim purpose, their movements precise despite the heat and smoke. Every time they add another bundle of wood, a fresh surge of flame erupts and a collective murmur passes through the crowd. You find yourself scanning the empty space in the center, the designated spot where the town's shadow is supposed to be. Is it different? Does the fire somehow make it less dark? More vibrant? Of course not. It's just a patch of ground illuminated by firelight. The real shadows cast by the fire in the buildings are far more dramatic and noticeable. It's a potent visual metaphor, isn't it? The physical effort, the visible struggle, creating more literal darkness while attempting to burn an abstract, cursed one. A mainstream historical fact about public burnings is their intended performative aspect. Whether it was the burning of heretical text, effigies of political enemies, or individuals accused of crimes like witchcraft, the act was often a spectacle designed to be witnessed by the community. It wasn't just about the destruction of the object or person. It was about a public demonstration of power, justice, as defined by the authorities, and a warning to others. The careful staging, the gathering of crowds, the pronouncements made before or during the burning, all serve to reinforce social norms, religious dogma, or political authority. In Oakhaven, while the object being burned, a shadow, is unique, the performance of the act, the public gathering, the communal effort to build and light the pyre, the collective witness, aligns with this historical pattern of public rituals as tools for social cohesion and control, or in this case, desperate collective action against perceived chaos. The minutes tick by, marked by the relentless roar of the fire and the silent turning of the earth. The midnight hour, the moment designated for the shadow's darkest presence, slowly begins to recede. The fire is at its peak now, a magnificent, terrifying display of raw energy. It feels primal, ancient, like something that belongs in the deepest myths, not a quiet village square. You notice details, the way the smoke catches the light, swirling like tormented spirits, the sweat glistening on the faces of the villagers closest to the heat, the hushed whispers that sound almost like prayers. And beneath it all, your own heartbeat, a frantic drumbeat against the roaring fire, a reminder of your own physical presence in this surreal scene. Someone points towards the center. "Did you see that?" they whisper. "A flicker, right there." Several heads turn. You stare, straining your eyes. Is it just the firelight dancing? Or was there something fleeting, something other? You see nothing but firelight and smoke and empty ground. But the hope in their voices is contagious, or perhaps just unsettling. It makes you question your own senses. What if? What if belief can make you see things? Or what if the curse is reacting? A quirky or fringe tidbit relates to historical superstitions about shadows. Across various cultures and time periods, shadows were sometimes seen as more than just the absence of light. They could be considered an extension of the soul, a person's double, or even a vulnerable point where one could be harmed or influenced by malevolent forces. There were beliefs that stepping on someone's shadow could cause them pain, or that certain spirits or creatures had no shadows. The idea of a town having a collective shadow that could be cursed, while not a universally documented historical belief, taps into this broader human fascination and fear of the shadow self and the intangible parts of existence. Oakhaven's action, however strange, resonates with these deeper, often forgotten, layers of symbolic thought about darkness and identity. As the fire begins to subside, the flames no longer reaching quite so high, the roar softening into a deep, resonant crackle. A new tension settles over the crowd. The initial burst of activity and desperate hope gives way to anxious waiting. Did it work? Is the curse broken? The pyre is still burning fiercely, a large, glowing heart in the center of the square. But the peak moment of the ritual has passed. Midnight is over. You look at the faces around you again. The initial fervor has faded, replaced by uncertainty. They are scanning the ground, scanning each other, scanning the air, searching for any sign, any change. Has anyone coughed? Did someone look less pale? Is the air easier to breathe? The subjective nature of their suffering means any perceived change, however small, could be interpreted as a victory, or any continued ailment as a sign of failure. Historians still argue whether mass hysteria in times of crisis is a purely psychological phenomenon, a social contagion of fear and belief, or if it can sometimes be triggered by environmental factors like tainted food, disease, or even unusual atmospheric conditions. In Oakhaven, was the confession and the subsequent ritual a symptom of a collective psychological breakdown fueled by prolonged suffering? Or was it a genuine, if perhaps misguided, attempt to combat a real external force that simply manifested in ways they interpreted as supernatural? The lack of clear empirical evidence makes it impossible to definitively separate the psychological from the potentially real within their perceived reality. The fire continues its work of consumption, turning wood and straw into ash and smoke. It feels like a long time has passed since the first spark. The air is thick with the smell of the dying fire. The heat is still significant, but no longer overwhelming. The pyre is now a glowing mass of embers, occasionally sending up a final, defiant flame. The villagers remain. They stand vigil around the pyre, reluctant to leave, unwilling to break the spell of this desperate night. Some are slumped with exhaustion. Others stand ramrod straight, eyes fixed on the glowing embers. The silence has returned, deeper now, heavier than before. It's not the silence of fear that marked the days before the confession, but the silence of profound, uncertain anticipation. The waiting game has begun. They have done it. They have gathered. They have built. They have burned. They have, to the best of their understanding, burned the town's shadow at midnight. Now they wait to see if the impossible act has yielded an impossible result. The fire glows, the smoke curls, the night deepens towards dawn, and Oakhaven holds its breath. The first hint of dawn isn't a sudden burst of light, but a slow, almost reluctant graying of the sky on the eastern horizon. You're still standing there in the square, feeling the cold seeping into your bones despite the residual heat from the pyre. The air is thick with the smell of spent fire, acrid smoke, cold ash, and the underlying scent of damp earth. It's a smell that says something burned here, but offers no clue as to whether it was successful or utterly futile. As the light strengthens, painting the tired buildings in hues of gray and pale gold, the scene becomes starkly visible. The magnificent roaring inferno of midnight is gone, replaced by a large, dark mound in the center of the square. It's mostly ash now, a vast pile of carbonized wood and straw, still radiating a faint warmth if you stand close enough. Wisps of smoke continue to curl upwards from the embers deep within, thin tendrils against the brightening sky, looking less like the smoke of a powerful ritual and more like, well, just smoke from a bonfire that's dying out. The villagers are still here too, scattered around the square. They look rough. Faces are smudged with soot. Eyes are red-rimmed from smoke and lack of sleep. Their clothes are probably smelling delightfully smoky, which is a great look for the "I just participated in a desperate, potentially insane ritual" aesthetic. Some are sitting on doorsteps or leaning against walls, too weary to stand. Others are still standing near the pyre's remains, staring intently at the ashes as if expecting a phoenix to rise from them, or perhaps just a note from the curse saying, "LOL, nope, try again." There's a palpable sense of deflation in the air. The desperate energy of building the pyre and the fervent hope of watching it burn have been replaced by a quiet, heavy disappointment. Nobody is cheering. Nobody is declaring victory. They are just there, waiting for a miracle that clearly isn't happening, or at least isn't happening in a way that involves flashing lights in a celestial choir. It's more like waiting for a delayed bus that you suspect is never going to arrive. You watch them, feeling like an anthropologist observing a deeply bizarre cultural practice, while simultaneously feeling the grit of ash between your teeth and the ache in your own feet from standing all night. You could have just stayed in bed, enjoyed a nice, uneventful sleep, but no, you had to witness the town try to burn its own shadow. Decisions, decisions. At least you have a good story, even if it's a story about nothing happening. People are starting to stir, stretching cramped limbs, rubbing the sleep from their eyes. They look around at each other, a silent question passing between them. Did you see anything? Did you feel anything different? Did your cough get better? The problem with a curse that manifests as general malaise and misfortune is that its lifting isn't usually marked by a dramatic, undeniable event. It's subtle, subjective, and in the absence of anything clear, doubt thrives like a particularly hardy weed. You find yourself scanning the ground again, the spot right next to the pyre where the town shadow was supposedly concentrated at midnight. In the growing daylight, it's just ground. Patches of dirt, maybe a few stray bits of charred wood. There's no special darkness, no lingering spectral presence, just the mundane reality of Earth receiving the morning sun. It's almost laughably normal given the intensity of the night's events. It's like throwing a massive party to exorcise a ghost from your kitchen, only to find the ghost wasn't there. But now you have a huge mess and a hangover. A few villagers tentatively approach the edge of the ash pile. They poke at it with sticks, sending up little clouds of fine gray dust. It looks final, like the end of a chapter, but not necessarily a victorious one. The fire consumed the wood, the straw, the symbols they added, maybe even some unfortunate insects that got too close. But did it consume the concept they were trying to burn? Logic says no. Desperate hope desperately hoped yes. Reality seems to be leaning heavily toward logic right now. The silence is punctuated now by yawns, coughs. Oh, look, someone's still coughing. Definitely not cured then. And the occasional low murmur of conversation. It's not the tense silence of anticipation from before the fire, nor the awe-filled silence during its peak. It's the quiet, weary silence of disappointment. The air is heavy with it. It smells like failure, with a distinct note of wood smoke. You notice a child sitting on the ground, tracing patterns in the ash with their finger. It's a simple human gesture in the midst of this strange aftermath, a reminder that life, even in Oakhaven, continues. Children still play, even if their playground is the remnants of a ritual meant to save them from an invisible threat. It's oddly poignant, or maybe just a bit depressing, probably both. A mainstream historical fact about the aftermath of failed communal rituals or prophecies is the phenomenon of cognitive dissonance and belief persistence. When a community invests heavily, emotionally, socially, and perhaps even physically, in a belief system or a predicted event, like the end of the world, or in this case, the breaking of a curse, and that event fails to materialize or the ritual doesn't yield the expected results, they don't necessarily abandon their beliefs immediately. Instead, people often engage in complex psychological work to reduce the discomfort, dissonance, caused by the contradiction between their belief and the reality. This can involve reinterpreting the signs, finding external excuses for the failure. They didn't perform the ritual perfectly. Someone sabotaged it. The curse is stronger than they thought. Or even strengthening their commitment to the belief in the face of disconfirming evidence. This helps them maintain their social bonds within the community and avoid the difficult admission that their collective effort and faith were misplaced. Here in Oakhaven, you can see the beginnings of this process. The tentative questions, the searching for subtle signs, the avoidance of outright declarations of failure. They are starting to rationalize, to look for reasons, why it didn't work perfectly, rather than confronting the possibility that the premise itself was flawed. It's a coping mechanism, perhaps, a way to avoid the total collapse of their shared reality. You see a group of older women huddled together talking in hushed tones. Their faces are grim. Are they discussing what went wrong? Whispering new theories about the curse or its origins? Are they perhaps blaming the confessor? Suggesting she somehow wasn't pure enough or held something back? Scapegoating is another common reaction when collective efforts fail. It's easier to blame a person than to accept that the universe doesn't operate according to your bonfire rituals. A quirky or fringe tidbit related to failed magical practices involves the concept of sympathetic magic gone wrong. In many folk belief systems, sympathetic magic operates on the principle that like affects like, or that a part can influence the whole. Burning a representation, the shadow, to affect the thing itself, the town state, is a classic example. However, what happens when the sympathetic link is flawed, or the representation isn't truly connected to the cause of the problem? The ritual becomes not just ineffective, but potentially confusing or even harmful to the community performing it, as it consumes their resources and time and hope without addressing the actual issue, whatever that might be, whether a real disease, environmental toxin, or psychological distress. Oakhaven's attempt to burn an abstract concept like a town shadow leans into this. Was the failure because the magic was wrong? Or because there was nothing supernatural to begin with, and they were just burning wood? The sun is fully up now, casting long, stretching shadows that are entirely normal. Your own shadow is there, following you faithfully, or perhaps just lurking behind you, waiting for you to trip. The contrast between these ordinary physical shadows and the abstract, terrifying town shadow they tried to destroy couldn't be starker. It highlights the conceptual disconnect at the heart of their actions. They were fighting a ghost with a flamethrower. Historians still argue whether the persistence of seemingly irrational beliefs and practices in communities, even in the face of contradictory evidence or repeated failures, is primarily a result of social reinforcement, cognitive biases that favor existing beliefs, or if these practices serve a deeper, non-literal purpose, acting as metaphors or social rituals that address underlying anxieties, even if they don't achieve their stated magical goals. Was the Oakhaven fire really about burning a shadow? Or was it a desperate, symbolic act of a community trying to exert control in a world where they felt powerless? A way to channel their fear and frustration into tangible action, regardless of its literal efficacy. You see a few people starting to drift away from the square, heading back towards their homes. Should you go too? There's nothing more to see here, really. Just a pile of ash and a crowd of tired, disappointed people. The high drama of the night has evaporated, replaced by the mundane reality of a failed effort and the dawning of a new, still cursed, day. Someone trips over a loose cobblestone near the edge of the square. A small thing, a simple accident, but a few people flinch, casting anxious glances. Is that a sign? Is the curse still active, causing minor misfortunes? The ambiguity is back. The lack of clear, undeniable success means every small negative event can be interpreted as proof that the problem persists. The mundane is reinfused with dread. It's like when you try a dubious home remedy for a cold, like eating 3 cloves of raw garlic and standing on your head. When you're still sick the next day, you don't immediately conclude the remedy was stupid. You think, maybe I didn't stand on my head long enough, or perhaps I needed 4 cloves. You look for flaws in the execution, not the premise. Oakhaven is doing the same thing, but on a community-wide scale with existential dread and a massive pile of ash. It's honestly quite impressive in a tragicomedy sort of way. You almost want to give them points for effort, even if the points are for most elaborate way to achieve nothing. The air is getting colder as the sun climbs higher, dispelling the last of the heat from the pyre. The smoke has thinned considerably, a faint gray haze against the blue sky. The square is beginning to look less like a ritual site and more like, well, like a town square where someone had a really, really big barbecue last night and forgot to clean up. The overall mood has shifted from desperate hope to quiet resignation, maybe even a touch of bitterness. You hear snippets of conversation as people pass by. Didn't work, did it? Waste of good wood, just like everything else in this town. The shared delusion or shared faith, depending on your perspective, that united them in action is beginning to fray at the edges under the harsh light of day and the undeniable reality that things don't feel any different. They burned a shadow, or what they believed was a shadow. They poured their hope and energy into the flames, and the morning, indifferent and gray, has arrived to reveal that the fundamental problem, the pervasive sense of blight and misfortune, remains. What do you do when your most drastic measure fails? When you play your final card and the deck turns out to be empty? That's the question hanging in the air, heavier than the lingering smoke. The quiet desperation of the waiting game has ended, replaced by the hollow ache of knowing the wait was likely for nothing. The gray light of dawn deepens into the pale, watery gold of early morning. The sky isn't exactly cheerful, more like someone spilled diluted sunshine on a dirty canvas. But it's light enough now that the details of the scene in the square are undeniable. The grand pyre, the desperate hope, the all-consuming flames, they're just a pile of cooling ash and charred debris. It looks less like the site of a world-altering ritual and more like a really successful campfire that got a bit out of hand. You can see the lines of fatigue etched deep on people's faces. They're not just tired, they look profoundly weary, like the very act of standing requires immense effort. The shared energy of the night has completely dissipated, replaced by a heavy individual slump. They're starting to disperse, not in any kind of organized way, but slowly, one by one, like sand grains scattering. A few people linger, staring at the ash, perhaps hoping for some last-minute sign, a puff of rainbow smoke, a tiny non-cursed squirrel to emerge. Anything. But mostly they just turn and shuffle away, heading back towards their small houses, the scent of failure clinging to their clothes along with the wood smoke. The sounds of the morning are different too. No more excited whispers, no fervent chanting, no crackling roar of fire. Now it's just the scraping of shoes on cobblestones, the distant crowing of a rooster that clearly didn't get the memo about the town-wide curse attempt. Maybe a door creaking open and shut. The mundane sounds of daily life, but they feel muted, heavier than before. It's the sound of a town absorbing a collective blow, the soft thud of hope hitting the cold ground. You stand there for a while longer, watching the square empty out. You could probably do with a shower. You definitely smell like you spent the night attending a particularly intense barbecue where the main course was abstract concepts. And your feet, let's just say they've seen better days. But there's a strange pull to witness this moment, the quiet aftermath, the deflation that follows such intense, if misguided, effort. It feels like observing the moment when everyone realizes the emperor has no clothes. Except in this case, the emperor was a flaming pile of wood representing a shadow, and the clothes were the town's hopes and dreams. As the last few stragglers drift away, the square is left to you, the ash pile, and the normal, completely uncursed shadows stretching across the stones. It feels abandoned. Like a stage after the play is finished, and all the actors have gone home, leaving the props and the lingering scent of theatrical smoke. The silence is no longer pregnant with possibility, but simply empty. The town doesn't suddenly transform back into its pre-cursed state. The blight remains, a dull, persistent ache in the background of everything. The coughs you heard last night, still there. The general air of melancholy, thicker than ever. If anything, the failure of the ritual has only amplified the sense of hopelessness. They tried their most dramatic, symbolic act, their Hail Mary pass against the unseen enemy, and it didn't work. What's left? Just the grim reality they woke up to. You start walking, letting your feet lead you away from the square and back into the narrow streets. The houses look the same as yesterday, but the air feels different. There's a palpable sense of defeat that hangs in the damp air like a fog. People are starting their morning routines, but slowly, reluctantly. You see a baker opening his shop, his face grim, the usual rhythm of his movements lacking its usual snap. A farmer is hitching his horse to a cart, his shoulders slumped. The children you saw playing earlier, you don't see them now. Maybe they were told to stay inside, or maybe even their youthful energy is dimmed by the pervasive mood. There's an unspoken understanding among the townsfolk you encounter, a shared look that says, yeah, didn't work. There are no grand pronouncements of failure, no town meeting to dissect what went wrong. Just a quiet, collective acknowledgement that the problem persists. It's a very Oakhaven way of dealing with catastrophe, not with drama, but with weary resignation and a distinct lack of surprise. It's like they expected it to fail all along, deep down, but had to try anyway. It's the hope that kills you, or in this case, leaves you smelling faintly of charcoal in crushing disappointment. The return to routine is stark, the struggle for normalcy in the face of an ongoing, inexplicable hardship. You see women drawing water from the well, their movements heavy. Men heading out towards the fields, their steps measured and slow. The familiar pattern of life reasserting itself, but overlaid with the shadow of the failed night. It's a grim kind of resilience, the simple, grinding persistence of having to feed yourself, shelter yourself, and keep going even when everything feels broken. This phenomenon of communities returning to routine and absorbing failure after a significant but unsuccessful collective effort to solve a crisis is actually a recognized pattern. A mainstream historical fact. In times of widespread hardship, famine, or disease outbreaks, communities throughout history have often engaged in collective rituals, prayers, or actions aimed at appeasing perceived supernatural forces or breaking curses. When these efforts fail to bring about immediate relief, the community doesn't typically collapse entirely. Instead, there's a period of disappointment and reevaluation, followed by a gradual return to the necessary daily tasks for survival. The belief might not disappear entirely, but it might be reinterpreted. Perhaps they didn't pray hard enough, or the ritual wasn't pure, or integrated into the ongoing struggle rather than being seen as a single, decisive solution. Life stubbornly goes on, albeit with diminished spirits and perhaps a lingering sense of betrayal by the powers they sought to influence. Here in Oakhaven, the reinterpretation hasn't really begun yet, but the return to mundane tasks is well underway. The sheer necessity of living outweighs the existential dread, at least for now. You can't eat hope or shelter under disappointment, so you go back to tending crops and mending roofs, even if your heart isn't in it. It's a testament to human or Oakhavenian stubbornness. You pass by the church, its doors are closed. No bells ringing this morning, no sign of the pastor. Maybe he's as disappointed as everyone else. Or maybe he's back to wrestling with theological implications of a curse that can apparently shrug off a town-sized bonfire. You imagine him sitting in his study, head in hands, muttering about free will and divine intervention, or lack thereof. A quirky or fringe tidbit related to the aftermath of failed rituals involves the concept of residual energy, or spiritual backwash. Some folk beliefs suggest that intense magical or ritualistic acts, even if unsuccessful in achieving their stated goal, can leave behind a kind of energetic residue. In the case of a failed ritual intended to dispel negativity, this residue might not be positive. It could manifest as lingering unease, heightened tension, or even a subtle increase in minor misfortunes, almost as if the unsuccessful attempt stirred up the very forces it tried to combat, or simply drained the community's collective luck or resilience. While Oakhaven's problems likely predate the fire, the palpable gloom and the sense of everything feeling slightly worse could be interpreted through this lens. Not just the psychological effect of failure, but a subtle, lingering effect of the act itself, or, just the fact that they stayed up all night burning wood for no reason and are now really tired and still cursed. Probably that second one, honestly. You walk towards the edge of town where the fields begin. The crops look as sickly as before, their leaves yellowed, their growth stunted. Nothing about the landscape suggests a magical cleansing has occurred. The blight persists, a quiet visual reminder that the night's spectacle achieved nothing tangible. It's like trying to cure a persistent cough by wearing a funny hat. You perform the ritual, put on the hat, you wait for the effect, stop coughing, and when it doesn't happen, you're left with the cough and the awkward hat. Oakhaven is now wearing the awkward hat of, we tried to burn our shadow and it didn't work. The air out here smells faintly of damp earth and decay, the familiar scent of Oakhaven's slow decline. It's a smell that the smoke from the pyre couldn't overpower. And now that the smoke is thinning, it's back in full force. It's a smell that permeates everything in this town, a constant background note of things not being quite right. Historians still argue whether the return to routine after a community crisis is primarily a sign of resilient social structures, the simple biological imperative to survive, or if it reflects a deeper form of collective denial, a refusal to confront the full kind of implications of the failure or the persistence of the problem. Woodglane, is Oakhaven's return to work a brave act of perseverance, or just the only thing they know how to do? Are they being strong or simply unable to imagine any other way of existing, even in misery? It's hard to say from the outside, looking in, or from the inside feeling tired and still smelling faintly of disappointment and soot. You see a couple of children kicking a worn-out ball near a barn. Their movements are listless, not the energetic chaos you'd expect from kids. Even their play seems subdued, touched by the town's malaise. They aren't laughing, just going through the motions. It's a small thing, but it speaks volumes. The curse, or whatever it is, hasn't just affected the crops and the health of the adults. It seems to have leached the simple joy even from childhood games. The sun is higher now, but it offers little warmth. The chill of the night still lingers in the air, a physical echo of the emotional coldness that has settled over the town. The immediate, desperate excitement of the ritual is long gone, replaced by the quiet, grinding weight of the aftermath. It's a return to the familiar, bleak normal, but with the added burden of a failed attempt at salvation. The shadows may not have burned, but the town's spirit took another hit. You can hear the distant sound of a hammer, someone doing some repair work. A small sound, but it signifies that life continues. The houses might be crumbling, the crops failing, and the people weary, but they are still here, still trying, in their own muted way. It's not inspiring exactly, more persistent, like a stubborn cough you just can't shake, which, come to think of it, is a pretty good metaphor for Oakhaven itself right now. The quiet slump that settled over Oakhaven after the pyre burned down without breaking the curse doesn't last. It's like the stillness after a storm, deceptively calm, but the real damage is just starting to show. The shared disappointment, which for a brief, weary morning seemed to unite everyone in mutual failure, begins to curdle. That heavy silence starts to break, not with renewed hope or practical plans, but with whispers. Low, furtive whispers exchanged in doorways, over fences, in the hushed corners of the market square, when a few stalls tentatively reopen. These aren't whispers of shared commiseration anymore. They're whispers of doubt, of suspicion. The question hanging in the air isn't, why didn't it work, in a mournful sense. It's, why didn't it work, in a sharp, accusatory tone. Someone must be responsible. This magnificent town-wide effort, this dramatic, fiery symbol of defiance against the unseen foe, couldn't possibly have failed on its own, right? It had to be sabotaged. Or more likely, something about the town, or someone in the town, was impure, wasn't worthy, was somehow blocking the magic. You catch fragments of these conversations as you move through the town. Eyes darting, voices dropping as you pass. Didn't look right, did she? Never believed anyway I saw him. Maybe it's because of what they did. The pronouns are vague at first, the accusations implied rather than stated. But the undercurrent is clear. The problem isn't the curse itself or even the chosen method. The problem is us. Or more conveniently, it's them. This shift from shared misery to internal finger-pointing is disturbingly fast. It's a defense mechanism, maybe. If you can find a person to blame, the problem becomes less abstract, less terrifying. It's not the unknowable power of a curse. It's old man Hemlock's grumpy attitude, or the peculiar way the miller's wife hums off key, or the fact that the new family who arrived last year has slightly different customs. It's much easier to get angry at a neighbor than at a blight you can't see or touch. The tension thickens the air, replacing the smell of ash with something colder, sharper. You walk past two women who abruptly stop talking as you approach, their faces hardening into masks of indifference. A group of men gathered near the well fall silent, their eyes following you with a mixture of suspicion and resentment. It feels like everyone is watching everyone else, looking for signs, searching for fault lines. You might even feel a prickle on the back of your neck, wondering if your own presence, your status as an observer who doesn't fully belong, is starting to attract unwanted attention. Maybe you didn't participate in the ritual with the required fervor. Maybe you seem too detached, just another potential suspect in the grand jury of public opinion. The obvious targets emerge first, those on the fringes of the community, the reclusive elder who lives outside of town, the family perceived as different or slightly unusual, those who perhaps didn't appear as heartbroken as everyone else by the curse's effects, maybe because they're just naturally stoic, or maybe because they're part of the problem, obviously. The logic is flimsy, driven by fear and frustration. But in a community desperate for answers, flimsy logic is better than none. You hear talk about Old Man Hemlock. He's always been a bit odd, keeps to himself, knows a surprising amount about local plants that are probably, definitely, maybe sometimes used in hexes. Did he really throw his shadow into the fire with conviction? Or did he just go through the motions, his heart not in it? Or worse, did he perhaps whisper something, a counterspell, a dark blessing as he did? The whispers about him grow darker, tinged with fear. Then there's the widow Morwen. Her grief is too quiet, they say, too contained. Why isn't she wailing and tearing her hair out like a proper cursed person? Maybe she's not cursed. Maybe she knows something. Maybe her shadow didn't burn because it wasn't a cursed shadow at all, but something else entirely. Her quiet nature, once seen as merely sad, is now reinterpreted as secretive, suspicious. The blame isn't only directed at individuals, it's also aimed at perceived group failures. Maybe the whole town wasn't unified enough. Maybe there was sin hidden in the community that the ritual couldn't cleanse. Maybe someone didn't confess their transgressions fully before the ritual. This leads to an increase in public displays of piety alongside the private accusations. People attend church more often, perform acts of charity, trying to outwardly demonstrate their worthiness, perhaps to deflect suspicion from themselves. It's a weird mix of genuine fear and performative virtue. The pastor who helped lead the ritual isn't immune either. Was his faith strong enough? Did he perform the blessings correctly? Some whispers suggest he seemed hesitant, that his voice faltered at a key moment. Others claim he didn't choose the right scripture, or that the prayers weren't offered with enough intensity. The pressure on him is immense. He tried to be the spiritual leader through the crisis, and now that the crisis persists, his leadership is being questioned, implicitly or explicitly. You see him looking haggard, his usual gentle expression replaced by worry and fatigue. He probably hasn't slept much, torn between his own disappointment and the growing tension among his flock. Historians still argue whether the search for scapegoats in times of collective crisis is a primal, inherent human behavior, rooted in a need to externalize blame and reassert control, or a learned societal response, a product of specific cultural or religious frameworks that encourage the identification and expulsion of perceived impurities or dissenters. Is it just hardwired into us to find someone to point at when things go wrong? Or is it something we learn from our communities and histories? In Oakhaven, it feels alarmingly natural, like a storm they were always going to weather, just waiting for the right conditions of fear and disappointment to brew. The division carves visible lines through the town. People avoid certain streets if they know those people live there. Conversations stop when a suspected person walks by. Children are told not to play with other children whose parents are under suspicion. The shared fire of the ritual is replaced by the cold isolation of mistrust. It's heartbreaking to watch, this community tearing itself apart when it should be uniting against the external threat. But that's the insidious nature of fear. It makes enemies of neighbors. A quirky or fringe tidbit about historical scapegoating practices involves the use of sin eaters. In some historical folk traditions, a person, often poor or marginalized, would be hired to ritually consume food and drink laid out on or near a deceased person. By eating the food, the sin eater was believed to absorb the sins of the departed, allowing their soul to rest in peace. While not directly about blaming the living for community misfortune, it reflects a cultural impulse to designate a specific person to take on a burden of impurity or wrongdoing that affects others. In Oakhaven, there's no formal sin eater, but the villagers are effectively trying to turn certain individuals into living receptacles for the town's collective failure and the curse's persistence. hoping that by isolating or blaming them, they can purify the whole. It's less about absolution and more about expulsion. The jokes are gone now. The gentle sarcasm feels out of place. The atmosphere is too charged, too brittle. Try making a crack about someone's shadow having too much cholesterol to burn, and you'd likely get a stone-cold stare, or worse. People are jumpy, on edge. A sudden loud noise makes everyone flinch. Every unusual occurrence, a cow falling sick, a child stumbling, a sudden gust of wind, is immediately scrutinized for meaning, potentially linked back to the suspected individuals. Is that cow sick because Old Man Hemlock looked at it funny? Did that child trip because the Widow Morwen walked past earlier? The paranoia is a thick fog descending over the town. You might see a confrontation brewing, two people arguing loudly in the street, one pointing an accusing finger, the other protesting their innocence with desperate fury. A small crowd gathers, not to intervene, but to watch, their faces grim, some nodding along with the accuser, others looking conflicted. The accusation might be something ridiculous like, "Your potato plants aren't yellow. You must be in league with the curse." Because in a town where everything is dying, even a patch of healthy vegetation becomes suspicious. It's like the Salem witch trials light, with less actual burning. They tried that already, remember? And more intense passive aggression and glares that could curdle milk. The division isn't just about external accusations, it seeps into families. Teenagers argue with their parents about who is safe to associate with. Spouses eye each other with suspicion, wondering if there are secrets being kept, sins not confessed. The bonds that held the community together are fraying, pulled taut by fear and the need to find someone, anyone to blame. This isn't a sudden explosion of violence, not yet. It's a slow, insidious process of alienation. The social fabric is being unpicked thread by thread. The market is quieter. People are wary of lingering in the square. Even the simple act of buying bread feels fraught if the baker is someone you suspect, or if the person in line behind you is someone you suspect, you of suspecting. It's a miserable stalemate of mutual distrust. The quest for a scapegoat provides a temporary, twisted sense of purpose. It gives people something to do about the curse, even if that something is harmful and misdirected. Instead of passively waiting for the blight to worsen, they can actively identify the problem people. It's a cruel distraction, a way to feel powerful in the face of utter powerlessness. The conversations you overhear are full of confirmation bias. Someone mentions a slightly odd thing Old Man Hemlock did a decade ago, and suddenly it's reinterpreted as proof of his sinister nature. Someone recalls a time the Widow Morwen didn't attend a town picnic, and now it's seen as evidence of her detachment from the community, her potential allegiance with the curse. Every past action is viewed through the lens of the present failure, twisted into a sign of guilt. It's a classic case of rewriting history to fit the current narrative of blame. This internal conflict is, in a way, another symptom of the curse's success. The curse isn't just making the crops fail and people sick. It's destroying the community from within. It's feeding on their fear and turning them against each other. If the goal was to isolate and weaken the town, sowing division is a highly effective strategy, and the townspeople are doing a fine job of assisting, thank you very much. You might see someone conspicuously avoiding walking down a certain street, or dramatically crossing the road when they see a particular person approaching. These aren't subtle actions. They're public declarations of suspicion, designed for others to see and hopefully emulate. The goal isn't just to identify the scapegoat, it's to isolate them, to make them a pariah, an object of collective scorn and fear. The narrative coalesces around a few key figures, their names whispered with increasing frequency and venom. The initial vagueness of someone gives way to "it's them." The town is picking its targets. And once targets are chosen, the situation becomes much more dangerous. Whispers have a way of turning into shouts, and shouts have a way of escalating into actions. The atmosphere feels like dry tinder, waiting for a spark, and there are plenty of frustrated, scared, and angry people holding torches. You can almost feel the invisible lines being drawn in the dust of the streets, dividing neighbor from neighbor, friend from friend. The pyre failed to burn the shadow, but the aftermath is successfully burning away the town's unity. The curse persists, and now Oakhaven faces a new self-inflicted wound. The search for answers has devolved into a search for someone to punish, and that rarely ends well for anyone involved. The air hangs thick, man, with unspoken accusations. Yes, but now those accusations aren't just hanging, they're solidifying. The targets have been chosen, remember? Old Man Hemlock, the reclusive one. Widow Morwen, the one who grieved too quietly. Maybe a few others who didn't fit the mold, or whose shadows, perhaps, seemed less enthusiastic about the whole pyre situation. Now, the whispers aren't just about suspicion. They're about conviction. People aren't asking if these individuals are connected to the curse. They're asking how and what are we going to do about it? You walk past Old Man Hemlock's small cottage on the edge of town, the one that always smelled faintly of damp earth and strange herbs. Before, it was just seen as the home of an eccentric old man. Now it feels ominous. The path leading up to his door is overgrown, deliberately untrodden. Someone has scrawled a symbol, crude but unmistakable, on his fence. Something that looks like a twisted root or a sickly plant, meant to symbolize the blight in him. You hear a dog barking frantically inside, maybe sensing the tension outside, or perhaps just annoyed at the lack of visitors. It feels like the town is holding its breath whenever you get near his place. No one goes there anymore, not even the children who used to dare each other to run up and knock. He's isolated, effectively cut off from the community he lived alongside for decades. Then there's Widow Morwen. Her house is closer to the center, making the shunning even more public. You see people visibly recoil if they have to pass her gate. When she tries to go to the market, the few vendors who are open seem to suddenly find pressing tasks elsewhere, avoiding eye contact. If she manages to buy something, the money is exchanged quickly, fingertips barely touching, as if she might be carrying the curse, or worse, complicity, like a contagion. Children are pulled close by their mothers when she walks by. Their face is a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. Her quiet dignity, the very thing that seemed suspicious before, now feels like a shield against the hostility, or maybe just the quiet despair of someone utterly alone in their time of need. It's hard to watch, honestly. You feel a pull to maybe say something, offer a kind word, but the atmosphere is so charged, you hesitate. Getting too close to the accused might just make you a suspect yourself. The accusations aren't just social. Practical acts of hostility begin to surface. Someone's window gets broken, maybe Old Man Hemlock's, maybe someone else perceived as complicit. Livestock belonging to an accused family is found scattered or injured, certainly not accidentally, of course. Small, petty acts of vandalism and sabotage, designed to make life difficult, to send a message. It's like a slow-motion siege against members of their own town. It's medieval, honestly, but without the cool castles or the occasional jousting tournament to lighten the mood. Just pure, unadulterated suspicion turning into nasty behavior. The justifications for this behavior are becoming increasingly elaborate and divorced from reality. Remember how people were scrutinizing every unusual event? Now, those events are being directly attributed to the scapegoats. That sudden storm that blew down a fence, Old Man Hemlock brewing ill weather, that patch of healthy land that didn't blight, proof that someone was siphoning the curse away from their own property, obviously the Widow Morwen because she was too quiet that one time. It's a classic case of confirmation bias on steroids, where every new piece of information, no matter how mundane or unrelated, is twisted to fit the predetermined narrative of guilt. If their dog barks, it's because they're signaling to the curse. If they don't bark, it's because they're too quiet, hiding something. There's no winning when the jury has already decided the verdict. The discussions around the town well, once places of gossip and weary commiseration, now take on a more dangerous edge. The conversations are lower, tighter, less who do you think is responsible, and more cases, what are we gonna do about it? The we is the key. It's the collective deciding it needs to act. There's talk of confronting the accused directly, talk of forcing confessions, talk of more drastic measures. The failure of the pyre ritual, the big, dramatic, town-wide event, has left a void, a frustration that is now looking for a different outlet. If the magic didn't work, maybe force will. The more moderate voices, those who try to counsel caution, to point out the lack of evidence, are increasingly drowned out. They are sometimes met with suspicion themselves. Why are you defending them? Are you hiding something? The pressure to conform to the collective paranoia is immense. It takes real courage to stand against the tide of fear. And frankly, not everyone in Oakhaven possesses that level of bravery right now. Most people just want the curse to end, and if blaming and punishing a few individuals seems like the quickest path, even if it's horrific, they might reluctantly go along with it. It's a terrible kind of utilitarianism, sacrificing the few for the perceived good of the many, even if that perception is based on mass delusion. A historical fact often cited when discussing mass hysteria and persecution is the European witch trials, which peaked between the 15th and 18th centuries. Across various countries, tens of thousands of people, primarily women, were accused of witchcraft, often under duress or torture, and executed. These trials frequently arose during periods of social unrest, economic hardship, or religious upheaval, much like the situation in Oakhaven. While the specific beliefs and methods varied, a common thread was the search for a human explanation for misfortune, the scapegoating of marginalized individuals or groups, and the use of fear and coercion to extract confessions and maintain social order, or a warped version of it. The Oakhaven situation, though localized and perhaps less overtly systematic, at least initially, echoes these darker moments in history where collective fear led to the persecution of innocent people. You might see the pastor again. He looks even more worn down. He tried to preach calm, tried to remind people of charity and forgiveness, but his words seemed to fall on deaf ears. His authority, which rested on spiritual guidance and community cohesion, is eroding as the community fractures. He's probably stuck between his moral duty and the overwhelming pressure from his increasingly frantic flock. Does he try to reason with them, risking being accused himself, or does he stay silent, implicitly condoning the slide into persecution? It's an impossible position. You see him watching the angry knots of people gathering, his face etched with helplessness and sorrow. A quirky or fringe tidbit related to collective delusions involves dancing manias that occurred periodically in Europe, particularly between the 14th and 17th centuries. These events saw groups of people seemingly compelled to dance uncontrollably for extended periods, sometimes for days until they collapsed from exhaustion or died. Causes remain debated, ranging from mass hysteria and psychological stress, perhaps triggered by famine or plague, to possible ergot poisoning, a fungus that grows on rye and can cause convulsions and hallucinations. While distinct from scapegoating, these manias demonstrate how collective stress and fear can manifest in bizarre, uncontrollable group behaviors that defy easy rational explanation, showing the potent, sometimes terrifying, power of shared psychological states. In Oakhaven, the shared psychological state isn't uncontrollable dancing, thankfully, because that would be weirdly upbeat for this narrative, but a shared escalating paranoia and need for retribution. The paranoia creates its own feedback loop. The more people whisper and point fingers, the more convinced they become of the guilt of the accused. The lack of immediate relief from the curse is taken as further proof that the problem hasn't been dealt with properly, reinforcing the need for harsher measures. It's a spiral, pulling the town down into suspicion and potential violence. Historians still argue whether the primary driver of witch trials and similar persecutions was genuine belief in supernatural malevolence and conspiracy, or if it was primarily a tool for social control, land acquisition, or the suppression of dissent, with accusations of witchcraft serving as a convenient pretext to eliminate unwanted individuals or consolidate power. In Oakhaven, it feels less like a calculated power grab, unless Old Man Hemlock's cottage is secretly sitting on a gold mine, which seems unlikely, and more like genuine, albeit misguided, belief fueled by desperation and fear. They truly believe these people are somehow connected to the curse, and that removing or punishing them is the only way to save themselves. The jokes, which were already dying out, are completely gone now. The atmosphere is too heavy for levity. Trying to make a joke about, say, the accused having particularly cursed sock collections would just earn you a dangerous look. People are taking this deadly seriously, and the consequences for not doing so feel increasingly risky. You might overhear snippets of planning. We should go to his place tomorrow night. Just talk to her, or make her talk. The shift from passive shunning to active confrontation is palpable. The community, or at least a vocal, increasingly dominant part of it, is mobilizing. They aren't just waiting for the purse to lift. They're planning to force it to lift by confronting what they perceive as its human source. The tension isn't constant, though. There are moments of weary quiet, particularly at night. But even in the silence, you can feel the low thrum of anxiety and anticipation. It's like the air before a thunderstorm, heavy and expectant. Everyone knows something is going to happen. The question is when and how far will they go? The physical signs of neglect and fear are worsening too. The blight continues its slow creep. More houses look empty, either because families have fled or because the inhabitants are among the accused and isolated. The marketplace is almost deserted. The normal rhythms of town life have broken down, replaced by this obsessive focus on blame. It's a grim testament to the power of fear to warp perception and behavior. These were neighbors, people who had lived side by side, shared meals, celebrated festivals, mourned losses together. Now fear has turned them into persecutors, ready to turn on their own without concrete evidence, solely based on speculation and shared panic. The collective mindset has shifted from problem solving, like building the pyre, remember that, to punishment. The energy isn't directed at practical solutions anymore, but at identifying and dealing with the perceived source of the problem, which they've decided is internal and human. It's easier to rage against a person than an invisible force. The justifications might even start incorporating distorted religious or moral arguments. Perhaps sermons start focusing on rooting out sin or impurity within the community as a way to appease the divine or whatever power is behind the curse. The pastor might be pressured to lend religious weight to the accusations or risk being seen as impious himself. Fear makes people twist their beliefs into ugly shapes to justify ugly actions. The narrative of the accused being different or outsiders solidifies. Old Man Hemlock's solitude isn't seen as preference, but as proof he was never truly part of them. Widow Morwen's quiet nature is evidence she wasn't sharing in the community's suffering. Therefore, she must be responsible for it. Any perceived difference is weaponized. You feel the weight of this atmosphere bearing down on you. As an observer, you are both anonymous and exposed. Your lack of overt participation in the accusations might be noticed. Your note-taking, your quiet observation might be misinterpreted. Are you documenting their shame, or are you somehow involved? The paranoia is infectious, and in this environment, neutrality can be seen as an implicit accusation of the majority. Better be careful where you step and who you talk to or don't talk to. The collective resolve, misguided as it is hardening. The initial uncertainty is fading, replaced by a grim determination. The whispers about confrontation are becoming louder, more confident. It feels less like a question of if the town will act against the accused, and more a question of when and how brutally. The dry tinder from Section 11 is not just waiting for a spark. People are actively gathering kindling and preparing to strike a match, and the targets know it. The air hangs thick with unspoken accusations. The general unease you felt upon arrival in Oakhaven, the quiet conformity, has curdled into something heavy and suffocating. The string of bad luck, the withered crops, the sick animals, the minor accidents. They're no longer just separate incidents. They've been woven together by fear and desperation into a single damning narrative. Oakhaven is cursed. And if there's a curse, there must be a cursor. The whispers you heard gathering intensity in Section 12, they found a target. The fear, diffuse and unsettling before, now has a name and a face. You start to hear it muttered in the lane, behind cupped hands in the marketplace, even whispered by children who usually chase hoops and stray chickens. It's Alara, old Alara, who lives just outside the village proper, down by the old mill stream. Why Alara? Well, think about it. Who is different? Who is isolated? Who knows things others don't, like the properties of herbs that can both heal and, supposedly, harm? Alara fits the bill perfectly. She's a widow, living alone. She doesn't attend church as regularly as the others, preferring her own quiet company in the rustling leaves by the stream. She's the one people go to for poultices and remedies when the village healer is stumped. But that knowledge is a double-edged sword, isn't it? In times like these, expertise starts looking a lot like suspicious power. Her little cottage, usually seen as merely isolated, now feels apart. The smoke from her chimney, once just smoke, now seems to carry a different scent. Not just wood smoke, but something else, something unsettling. The paths leading to her home are less traveled now, people making wide detours. Children are explicitly forbidden from going anywhere near her dwelling, told stories of what might happen if they wander too close. The fear isn't just of her, it's a physical aversion, a belief that merely proximity could be dangerous. Every single misfortune that has befallen Oakhaven over the past weeks and months is now reinterpreted through the lens of Alara's alleged malevolence. Remember that patch of withered seedlings? Well, wasn't Alara seen walking near that field just days before? The cow that went dry? Didn't Alara have a disagreement with his owner over a bolt of cloth last market day? The child who broke their arm? Perhaps they were lured near Alara's cottage and tripped by invisible hands. It's a textbook case of confirmation bias meets mass hysteria. Every piece of circumstantial evidence, no matter how flimsy or coincidental, becomes absolute proof once the target has been identified. It's like when your internet goes out right after you complained about your service provider online. Clearly, they remotely deactivated your router out of spite. Totally logical, right? You see the villagers watching her. When she occasionally comes into the village for supplies, the usual nods and brief exchanges are gone. People shrink away from her path. They clutch small charms or cross themselves as she passes. The looks on their faces aren't just fearful, they're accusatory. They don't wonder if she's the source. They know. Certainty, even if born of panic and twisted logic, is a powerful thing. The pressure to do something about Alara begins to build. The priest's sermons, while still urging prayer and repentance, subtly shift focus. He speaks of wickedness in our midst, of the need to purge evil to restore God's favor. While he might not name Alara from the pulpit, at least not yet, his words resonate with the villagers' consensus. This isn't just bad luck or divine testing anymore. It's an attack by a human agent wielding dark power, and that's something they can, presumably, confront. The communal fear becomes a unifying force, albeit a dark one. Where the misfortunes had initially fractured the village with suspicion, the identification of a single culprit brings them together against her. Shared fear is incredibly bonding, turning neighbors who might have mistrusted each other into allies in a perceived fight for survival. It's a grim kind of solidarity, fueled by panic and a desperate need for things to return to normal. They believe that if they can just remove the cause, the effects will cease. The sun will shine again, the crops will grow, the animals will be healthy. This shift from generalized fear of a curse to specific targeting of an individual is a mainstream historical fact seen repeatedly throughout history, especially during periods of inexplicable hardship. Think about the witch hunts in Europe and colonial America. They didn't typically flare up during boom times. They peaked during periods of agricultural failure, disease outbreaks, social upheaval, or economic stress. When communities were vulnerable and lacked scientific explanations, they sought supernatural ones. And those supernatural threats were often personified in individuals who were already on the fringes. The poor, the elderly, women, those with eccentric behavior, or those involved in disputes. Historians still argue whether the targeting of specific individuals in these panics was a conscious scapegoating mechanism to relieve social pressure, or a genuine, albeit misguided, belief in their supernatural culpability. Was it about finding someone to blame, or genuinely believing they were possessed by or in league with the devil? Probably a messy mix of both, driven by primal fear. A quirky or fringe tidbit that might fuel such suspicions. In some folk traditions, it was believed that a witch's power was particularly strong at certain times of the day or night, or that they could transform into animals. Imagine the added terror if someone claims they saw a cat with unusually bright eyes near a sick animal, and whispers spread that it was Alara in disguise. Or if someone reports hearing strange noises from her cottage after dark. These details, easily dismissed normally, become terrifying clues when fear is paramount. It's like thinking your toaster is haunted because it sometimes makes a weird noise. Except in Oakhaven, that haunted toaster could ruin your harvest. The tension in Oakhaven becomes unbearable. Every creak of a door, every distant cry, every shadow seems ominous. The villagers gather in small groups, the talk always circling back to Alara and the need to end the curse. The word witch is spoken, no longer a whisper, but a hard, sharp accusation. The concept of a curse, abstract and invisible, has become embodied in a single vulnerable person. Their logic, warped by terror, dictates that dealing with Alara is the only way to break the curse and save their village. You feel the pulse of the village quicken, a frantic energy replacing the earlier slump of despair. Desperation is turning into resolve, a grim determination to act. They have identified the enemy, and now they must confront her. The shift is palpable, from passive suffering under an unknown force to active pursuit of a known one. The quiet hum is gone, replaced by a low, dangerous growl. The time for whispers is over. The time for action, however misguided or terrible, is rapidly approaching. The narrative has narrowed. All eyes are on Alara's isolated cottage by the stream, waiting for the moment when fear boils over into confrontation. The low growl you felt simmering in the village has erupted into movement. It's not a single organized charge, but a ragged, determined flow of bodies pooling in the lane that leads down towards the stream, towards Alara's cottage. You are swept along with them, a leaf in a sudden, turbulent current. The air crackles, not just with cold or damp, but with a raw, animal energy, fear twisted into aggression. Torches flicker, casting wild, dancing shadows that make familiar faces seem monstrous. Pitchforks and clubs are clutched in hands that usually hold spades or sewing needles. The sound is a mix of heavy footsteps, ragged breathing, and low, guttural murmurs that occasionally spike into angry shouts. You walk beside the farmer, whose crops withered, his jaw set hard. Behind you is the woman whose cow went dry, her eyes wide and fixed straight ahead. The priest walks near the front, his face grim, clutching a worn Bible, his presence a silent, heavy endorsement of the mob's intent. Even the usually jovial baker is here, his face pale and tight. It's a collective purging, a desperate attempt to externalize and destroy the source of their suffering. It feels less like a group of individuals and more like a single, multi-headed entity propelled by a singular, terrifying purpose. The path to Alara's cottage seems longer now, the shadows deeper. The wind whispers through the trees and every rustle sounds like a furtive movement. You can almost hear the collective heartbeat, a frantic drumbeat pushing the crowd forward. They aren't just walking, they're marching against an enemy, one they've convinced themselves is tangible and defeatable. Remember the quiet despair that settled over Oakhaven? It's gone, replaced by this feverish, dangerous momentum. It's amazing how quickly fear can flip from paralyzing you to propelling you into action, especially when there's a convenient target. Like suddenly finding the energy to clean your entire house when you're avoiding one small, difficult task. Peak human behavior right there. As you approach the cottage, it sits there, small and unassuming, nestled amongst the trees by the gurgling stream. Smoke still curls faintly from the chimney, a sign of ordinary life, but in this context it feels sinister, like dark magic brewing within. The contrast between the peaceful setting and the furious energy of the mob is jarring, almost surreal. It's a postcard of tranquility being stomped on by a riot. They don't knock, they don't call out a formal summons. A few of the men, emboldened by the crowd and the darkness, surge forward, banging roughly on the door. Shouts erupt. "Alara! Come out, witch! Face your judgment. The sounds are harsh, ragged, stripping away any pretense of civility. This isn't about justice, it's about exorcising a demon, real or imagined. The door opens slowly, and there stands Alara. She doesn't look like a terrifying sorceress. She looks like an old woman. Her hair is gray, pulled back in a simple bun. She wears a plain, worn dress. Her face is lined, not with malice, but with age and perhaps a quiet sadness. Her eyes are wide, filled with a mixture of confusion and dawning fear, as she takes in the torchlit faces, the weapons, the raw hostility aimed directly at her. For a moment, the noise dies down, replaced by a tense silence. The mob seems almost momentarily taken aback by her ordinary appearance. But then the anger surges back, fueled by the very normalcy they see as a potential deception. Of course! She looks harmless, they think. That's part of the trick. Accusations start flying, a torrent of grievances unleashed. The withered crops, the sick animals, the broken arm, the mysterious illness, the general run of bad luck. Everything is thrown at her, twisted into evidence of her dark work. "You blighted my field," yells one man. "You poisoned my cow," shouts another. "You put a hex on this village," cries a woman, clutching a sick child. Each accusation adds another layer to the image of the monstrous witch they built in their minds, an image that has little to do with the trembling woman before them. Lara tries to speak, to protest, to deny. Her voice is thin, reedy, easily swallowed by the roar of the crowd. "No, I did nothing. I only tried to help," she cries, her hands held up defensively. But her words are ignored, dismissed as lies, or further proof of her deceitful nature. They don't want explanations. They want confession. Or failing that, confirmation of their predetermined guilt. She is roughly pulled from her cottage into the glare of the torches. They drag her towards a small clearing near the stream, a place usually used for washing clothes or watering animals, now transformed into an impromptu place of judgment. The air feels colder here, heavier. This swift, informal trial you're witnessing is a tragically common mainstream historical fact during periods of heightened fear and suspicion. In many historical witch hunts and accusations, there was little to no due process as we understand it today. Accused individuals were often presumed guilty, evidence was circumstantial or based on superstition, and confessions were frequently extracted under duress or torture. The accusers were often also the judges and the jury, driven by panic, prejudice, or sometimes personal vendettas or greed. There were no lawyers, no presentation of counter-evidence, just a community convinced of guilt and seeking a rapid resolution to their perceived problem. Think of the Salem witch trials, or the thousands executed across Europe during the 16th and 17th centuries. The legal frameworks were flimsy or non-existent when it came to witchcraft. The fear was the law. Now comes the test. How do you prove someone is a witch when their apparent powers are invisible curses? One common, albeit utterly ridiculous method in historical accusations was the search for a witch's mark. This was believed to be a spot on the body insensitive to pain or where the devil had supposedly suckled. Often, these were just moles, birthmarks, or scars. The villagers, spurred on by someone who claims knowledge of such things, maybe that woman who's always gossiping, begin to search Alara. They roughly examine her skin, looking for any perceived blemish or abnormality. It's a humiliating and terrifying ordeal, stripping away her dignity along with her clothes. A quirky or fringe tidbit about these tests: some witch finders would prick suspected marks with a needle. If the person didn't bleed or flinch, it was taken as proof of witchcraft. Imagine the horror, being poked and prodded by hostile strangers, knowing that the slightest reaction could condemn you, but so could no reaction. It's a lose-lose situation built on fear and pseudoscience. It's like being accused of being bad at parallel parking, and the test is you have to do it blindfolded while juggling chainsaws. The outcome is pretty much guaranteed to be bad. As they prod and examine her, the accusations continue. They point to her isolated cottage, proof she shunned the community. They mention her knowledge of herbs, proof she dealt in forbidden arts. They recall disagreements she had, proof she harbored ill will. Everything about her life that was slightly different is now weaponized against her. Alara is crying now, tears streaming down her face, not just from the rough handling, but from the sheer, overwhelming injustice and terror. She looks utterly broken, her earlier attempts at denial silenced by the force of the mob's conviction. Historians still argue whether the accusers in such historical panics genuinely believed their targets were witches, or if they were consciously scapegoating individuals to deflect blame for their own problems and societal failures. Was it truly supernatural terror, or a convenient way to get rid of someone you didn't like, maybe even seize their property? Or perhaps a desperate, panicked response to inexplicable hardship that needed a human face to blame? The truth is likely complex, a murky blend of all these motivations, amplified by collective hysteria. Someone points to a mole on her shoulder. "Look!" they shout. "The mark! It's the mark of the devil!" Others press closer, their faces contorted with a mix of fear and vindication. This is it. This is the proof they needed, manufactured out of thin air and a common skin blemish. The whispers have become shouts, the suspicions have become certainties, and the certainty is leading them towards a terrible conclusion. The mood shifts again, from accusation to judgment. The priest speaks, his voice amplified by the sudden hush that falls after the mark is discovered. He speaks of divine judgment, of cleansing the village, of protecting their souls from evil. His words, while perhaps not explicitly calling for immediate execution, lend a chilling legitimacy to the mob's actions. He doesn't intervene to protect her. His silence, or perhaps his veiled endorsement, is damning. You stand on the edge of the crowd, sickened by what you are witnessing. The collective madness is palpable, a suffocating blanket of fear and cruelty. This isn't the quiet, sleepy village you arrived in. This is something primal and terrifying, driven by a need to lash out, to restore balance by destroying the perceived imbalance. Alara, the quiet woman by the stream, has been transformed by their fear into the embodiment of the curse itself. And in their eyes, the only way to end the curse is to end her. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke, damp earth, and the metallic tang of fear. The torches cast long, dancing shadows that seem to swallow the truth and magnify the lies. The sounds are now hushed but heavy with intent. Shuffling feet, nervous coughs, the low mumble of agreement, punctuated by a single, heart-wrenching sob from the center of the circle where Alara stands, surrounded, condemned by a mole, and a village's terror. The stage is set for the final desperate act of Oakhaven's tragic play. The decision hangs in the torch-lit air for only a moment after the mark is identified. Then the mob surges forward again, galvanized by what they see as undeniable proof. There's no longer any pretense of questioning, only the grim determination of a terrible necessity. They believe they have found the source of their suffering, the embodiment of the curse that has gripped their village. And they believe there is only one way to break such a curse, one final desperate act to reclaim their lives from the encroaching shadow. Logs are quickly gathered, branches snap from nearby trees, anything dry enough to catch fire. It's a chilling efficiency born of panic. Alara is dragged towards the hastily assembled pyre, her cries now silent, replaced by ragged, gasping breaths and the shuddering of her body. Her eyes, wide with terror, dart from face to face in the crowd, finding no pity, only fear mirrored back at her, distorted by hatred. The belief driving them is absolute: eliminate the witch, eliminate the evil. It's a brutal, horrifyingly simple logic. You are standing close enough to feel the heat of the torches, to hear the low murmur of voices muttering prayers and imprecations. Some villagers avert their eyes, unable to watch directly, but they stay, rooted to the spot, their presence a tacit agreement with the horrific act unfolding. Others watch with fierce, almost righteous intensity, convinced they are purifying their community. The priest stands slightly apart, his head bowed, his silence interpreted by many as solemn approval. This culmination, the execution of an accused witch, is a tragically widespread mainstream historical fact across centuries and cultures. Methods varied. Burning was common in parts of Europe, believed to purify the land of evil and ensure the witch couldn't return from unconsecrated ground. Hanging was used elsewhere, And in some regions, trial by water could lead to drowning if the accused sank, proving innocence, or surviving the ordeal, proving guilt. The underlying principle was often the same. The physical removal of the perceived source of supernatural harm was seen as the only solution, a desperate measure taken when all other explanations for hardship failed. The flames begin to lick at the base of the pyre, casting wilder, more terrifying shadows than before. The smoke, thick and acrid, begins to rise, carrying with it the smell of burning wood and something else, a sharp human scent that makes you want to retch. Ilara's final moments are lost in the crackle of the fire and the low, unified hum of the crowd's desperate hope. They are watching, waiting, praying for the instant the curse lifts, for the air to clear, for the weight to be lifted from their shoulders. And then, silence. The fire burns, casting its orange glow on the faces turned towards it. But the air doesn't feel lighter. The chill wind off the stream still whispers through the trees. The shadows, far from retreating, seem to deepen and lengthen in the surrounding darkness. The smell of smoke lingers, heavy and suffocating. They watch. They wait. Dawn eventually breaks, gray and cold, painting the sky in muted tones. The pyre is a smoldering ruin. The clearing is silent, save for the gentle gurgle of the stream. But when the villagers return to their homes, they find the withered crops still withered. The sick animals are still ailing. The mysterious illnesses haven't vanished overnight. The pervasive, creeping dread that had settled over Oakhaven hasn't been burned away. It feels, if anything, heavier, tinged now with a different kind of coldness. The dawning horror of what they have done. A quirky or fringe tidbit from history and folklore surrounding such events. In some beliefs, the smoke from a witch's pyre was thought to carry the witch's spirit, or the curse itself, dispersing it further rather than containing or destroying it. There were even superstitions that rain on a witch's pyre was the sky weeping, or the witch's tears cursing the land further. Imagine the chilling thought. By attempting to destroy the curse, they might have just ensured its spread or replaced it with something worse. The haunting knowledge of their own cruelty. The shadow wasn't burned. The shadow wasn't Ilara. The shadow was perhaps the fear, the ignorance, and the capacity for violence that resided within the community itself, projected onto a vulnerable target. They tried to burn the manifestation of their problems, but instead they burned a person, and the problems remained. Historians still debate whether communities that carried out witch trials and executions, only to see their problems persist, ever truly questioned their fundamental beliefs about witchcraft, or if they simply looked for a new scapegoat or explanation. Did they consider that the blight on the crops might have been disease or weather, or that the sickness was simply sickness? Or did they double down, convinced the real witch was still out there, or that their cleansing wasn't complete? The human capacity for self-deception, especially when driven by fear and collective action, is vast. It's easier to believe in a witch than to accept random misfortune or complex, unsolvable problems. It's like blaming your Wi-Fi problems on a ghost instead of just needing a new router. Simpler explanation, much more dramatic. The long-term fate of Oakhaven after that night is a quiet, sorrowful footnote. The records simply fade, the village perhaps dwindling, its inhabitants carrying the unspoken burden of what they did. The curse wasn't lifted, but something fundamental about the village was broken that night, something that perhaps couldn't be fixed. They thought they were burning a shadow to save themselves, but in the process, they cast the darkest shadow of all. The story of the town that tried to burn its own shadow to end a curse isn't a triumphant tale of problem solving. It's a quiet tragedy, a reminder of how fear can twist perception, how easily collective panic can become cruelty, and how sometimes the monsters we fear are the ones we create ourselves. And perhaps, sometimes the greatest curse is simply the inability to look inward, to face the shadows within. Now, as the echoes of Oakhaven's desperate night begin to fade, wind down begins here. Let the final images of that distant village settle gently, like dust motes catching the last light. The flickering torches dim, the desperate shouts soften into whispers, and the heavy silence that followed their terrible act begins to melt away into the quiet darkness of the present moment. The cold fear that gripped Oak Haven is far, far away now, a story told and concluded. Take a deep breath, feel the air fill your lungs, slow and steady. The weight of the past of other people's fears and mistakes isn't yours to carry through the night. Let it go. The stream still flows, the moon still rises, and here, in your own space, there is only the gentle rhythm of your own breath, the softness of your pillow, the quiet comfort of the night settling in around you. There are no curses here, only the promise of rest. Let your muscles soften, your thoughts drift like clouds, peaceful and slow. Sink deeper into the warmth and quiet. The journey is over. Sleep now. Just sleep.